lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled a vacancy created by Justice Antonin Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the high court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the high court, and by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection means an electoral end. The socially conservative evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice married once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations.
Steve Mnuchin is in
creators.
charge of what is essentially a $500 billion slush fund. Our question, how can we force Congress to give money to average Americans instead of high-level grifters? I mean, to prevent him from using it to help this $500 billion slush fund from to help out his and Trump's rich buddies, Congress mandated that only companies that could demonstrate that they've been hired by the economic fallout of the coronavirus could qualify for the money, that it would have to be used to retain employees, and the money will be passed out in relatively small amounts. Now it turns out Mnuchin has rewritten the regulations so that an individual company can get up to $200 million, because so many small businesses need a new private jet, right? Only has to make commercially reasonable efforts to hang on to their employees during the term of the loan so they can put financial considerations ahead of the health of their workers, and no longer has to prove that they're financially in trouble because of the coronavirus. Additionally, most of the money has not been distributed, although it appears that a major Trump donor who runs a private jet company that shuttles rich people and executives to private golf courses is the largest recipient of the payments to date, giving professional grifters. And this is what we've done. We've handed professional grifters, Donald Trump and Steve Mnuchin, hundreds of billions of dollars to give away or spend at their own discretion. Is like dropping a couple of alley cats into a cage full of canaries. I mean, once again, the grifters get rich and the average American gets screwed. This was the topic of a hearing before the United States Senate today that was held largely virtually. It was held over Zoom. And Mike Crapo, the chairman of the committee, was, inviting members to speak. It was fascinating. CNN went to it live, which was pretty impressive. Sherrod Brown asked both Mnuchin and Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, former bankster Jerome Powell, former foreclosure king Steve Mnuchin, both of them former banksters. He asked him, how many families or how many people are you willing to let die? I'm paraphrasing here. How many people are you willing to let die in order to gain a half a point of GDP or 1,000 points going up on the Dow? And Mnuchin went, and Powell, both of them basically punted on the question. And so Brown just tweeted out, families don't want to hear about liquidity and financial doublespeak. Liquidity was, essentially Senator Brown said, the first word out of Secretary Mnuchin's mouth at today's banking hearing, not workers, not families, liquidity. He says families don't want to hear about liquidity and financial doublespeak. They want to hear how this administration will keep them safe when they go to work. Well, there's no talk about keeping people safe when they go to work. In fact, the message that we're getting from Trump is all you have to do is take a little chloroquine and you'll be fine. You can go right back to work, and that and zinc will keep the bugs away. Some of the side effects of chloroquine, by the way, include a spinning sensation, ringing in your ears, mood changes, irritability, blurred vision, confusion, unusual thoughts or psychosis, pale skin. Maybe this is why he's having to put so much makeup on. That's why he can't wear a mask, right? If he puts a mask on, it'll smear his makeup all over his face. Whoever thought that these guys that think that they're so macho would be loving a bald-headed guy with a giant comb over with makeup all over his face, who's as Nancy Pelosi points out, morbidly obese, and characterizing him as some sort of macho role model, putting his head on superheroes and things like that. It's just totally weird. But this is what Mnuchin has done. I mean, with this $500 billion. Speaking of grifters, Donald, Ivanka, Don Jr., and Eric are all being sued by a whole bunch of families that bought into this pyramid scheme that they were promoting. In fact, the Law and Crime, the legal magazine refers to it as an ugly pyramid scheme. He says the plaintiffs say it is a, quote, get-rich-quick scheme that relied on Trump and his family, quote, conning each of these victims into giving up hundreds or thousands of dollars, end quote, in violation of various state laws. It was plugged on Celebrity Apprentice. The case was originally filed as an anti-racketeering enterprise action. They've now just kind of downgraded it to good old-fashioned fraud, running basically a pyramid scheme. And they allege, this is in 2018 in the New York Times, actually, that when this first came out, the original complaint, quote, the complaint alleges that Mr. Trump and his family received secret payments from 3 business entities in exchange for promoting them as legitimate opportunities, when in reality they were get-rich-quick schemes that harmed investors, many of whom were unsophisticated and struggling financially. Trump was paid millions of dollars, according to this thing. Meanwhile, the grift continues down in Florida. In Tallahassee, the architect and manager of Florida's COVID-19 dashboard. This is the website that tells you, how many deaths you have, how many people are hospitalized, how many positive diagnoses you have, things like that. Her name is Rebecca Jones, and she said in an email to CBS 12, a local television station in Tallahassee, to their news division, she said that her removal, quote, was not voluntary, and that she was removed from her position because she was ordered to censor some data, but refused to, quote, manually change data to drum up support for the plan to reopen Florida, end quote. She made this announcement in a farewell email to other researchers who were working on the project, and said that her office is actually no longer managing this. Basically, Ron DeSantis, a grifter after Donald Trump's heart, has decided to take it over. How do we force Congress? How do we change America so that being a grifter isn't the principal qualification for being in the White House? That we're no longer rewarding these Republican grifters, whether they be in the White House or whether they be in the Senate or the House of Representatives, whether they be Republican governors, state members of the state House, the state Senate. I mean, here's another one. Donald Trump declared the state of emergency and pushed out of, I believe it was 40,000 National Guard members who went into 44 states, District of Columbia, and 3 U.S. territories, presumably at least Puerto Rico and Guam. I'm not sure what the third one would be. And these 40,000 people have been working, quote, full-time since early March on a wide range of sensitive and dangerous tasks, such as decontaminating nursing homes, setting up field hospitals, and performing tests for the virus. Well, guess what? If these guys work for 90 days, that adds to their potential to retire early from the military and get educational benefits. They get to pay, to go to college paid for by the government under the post 9/11 GI Bill, this new GI Bill. It takes 90 days of active duty in a dangerous environment. Well, Trump is pulling the plug on them after 89 days. And when the administration pushed this out, they included a little note here. This is from one of the officials. This is bizarre. The order will require a delicate messaging strategy in order to quell complaints. Quote, we would greatly benefit from unified messaging regarding the conclusion of their services prior to hitting the 90-day mark and the retirement benefit implications associated with it. In other words, Trump wants to screw the soldiers after he's screwed the investors. He did this with his casinos, too, you recall. He raised $1 billion by selling bonds, and then defaulted on all of them after he put $40 million in his own pocket from that money. I mean, we have grifters running not just the government, but the Republican Party as well. We've got to purge this. What are your best thoughts on how to purge the Republican Party of its grifters?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Or is grift so interlaced with republicanism, and has been since 1980, that the only cure is to throw out the Republican Party altogether? And welcome back. Renee in Live Oaks, California. Hey, Renee, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. The thing I want to understand is the electorate. Now, he's like what I looked up online is that it states online the electorate is there to protect the people from electing a dictator. And he's like the fifth president that has been elected by the electorate. Who are these
You're talking
people?
about the Electoral
Do
College?
we really need them?
You're talking about the Electoral College?
Yes. That's who he was elected by because the popular vote was Hillary Clinton.
Right.
Correct?
Every president since John Adams has been elected by the Electoral College. That's what the Constitution requires. There have been 5 of them. The 2 most recent Republican presidents, both Bush, who lost by 500,000 votes, and Trump, who lost by 3 million votes, who were elected by the Electoral College, but not by the popular vote. The same thing was true of Rutherford B. Hayes, and I'm not sure who else. But yeah, there's been a bunch of that, and we need to get rid of the Electoral College. The problem is it's in the Constitution. It was written in by the founders back, this goes back to when, to 1787, literally, when it would have taken 3, 4, 5 days, maybe 2 weeks to get a ballot or news about people running for president down to southern Georgia, for example, or northern Maine. And so what they did is they said each region will elect their local wise elder, essentially, who will physically go to Washington, D.C., get to know the candidates, and cast the vote representing their state. And, that's what happened for the first couple of elections. And then, the states started changing their individual laws, saying that their electors would take, in all but 2 states, the states say that the electors have to vote for whoever the majority of the people in the state voted for. In Nebraska and Maine, I believe it's Nebraska, I'm pretty sure, and I know it's Maine, each congressional district does that. And, states have different ways of doing this. There is a program called the National Popular Vote. You can find it at nationalpopularvote. I don't know if it's org or com. You'll have to look it up. But the National Popular Vote is a program where all the states agree, or enough states to equal the number of electoral votes necessary to make somebody president, agree that when when enough states have joined this compact, and they don't have enough states yet, but they're working on it. Virginia just joined, for example, just last month. When enough states join this compact, that they can actually elect the president doing this, that each one of those states agrees that whoever gets the popular vote will get their electoral votes regardless of how the people of their state voted. And that will, that'll render the whole electoral college moot. It'll essentially eliminate the electoral college, and that's a good thing. I mean, the electoral college was originally put in for a variety of reasons, the main one being that it would prevent a knave from being elected. I think knave was the word that Madison used. But this is the way to do it, is nationalpopularvote. Whatever it is. And so you can check that out, Renee. And if you're concerned about this issue, support that group, that is putting that together, and start calling your local, I forget what state you were in, Renee, but call the people in your state, the members of your state assembly or house and your state senate, and tell them that you want them to vote for the National Popular Vote Compact, which will eliminate the Electoral College. We'll be back. It's .com.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Hey, we have a brand new video up at thomhartmann.com for the people who are subscribers or supporters to our program. And this one's about national health insurance and why and how we really need a single-payer national health care system, whether you call it Medicare for all, or you call it single payer, or you call it whatever. Medicare for all, it has a lot of appeal because generally speaking, Medicare is positively viewed. That's what they call it in Canada. It's called Medicare. And, which makes sense, care for people using medicine. We would save at least $150 billion a year just on billing. You've got hospitals in the United States that have entire floors devoted to billing. Hospitals in Canada have one desk with, one or two people sitting at that desk, handling the billing. It's just crazy. And people would get better care. They get more comprehensive care. Our entire nation gets healthier. And there's a whole bunch of essentially bullet points to build this argument for Medicare for all over at thomhartmann.com. You can check it out right now. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Some other basically news about the Republican grift. And how do we as a country deal with grifters? I mean, Trump coming out yesterday and saying, I'm taking chloroquine. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. It doesn't matter. What he wanted to do was stop the conversation. You'll notice that he brought this up basically in the context of a question about firing the inspectors general for the State Department. And here you've got this major grift. I mean, this is a major example of essentially criminal malfeasance by Mike Pompeo. He violates the will of Congress. Congress says you may not give $8 billion worth of weapons to Saudi Arabia. You can't do it. They're using our weapons to kill innocent civilians in Yemen who just happen to be the wrong religion. You can't do it. You can't give them the money. And so Pompeo gives them the money anyway. So the inspector general looks into it and says there's something fishy here. And Pompeo goes to Trump and says, get rid of this guy. He's looking into me. And the guy's also looking into just, kind of garden variety corruption. Pompeo and his wife, particularly his wife, having federal employees run all kinds of weird errands for them and providing fancy housing and accommodations for her and all this kind of stuff. There's also that. But frankly, I think this is more about $8 billion going to the Saudis to keep them happy so they'll keep the flow of money to the Kushner and Trump families going. All that credit that they need from the Middle East. I mean, Kushner's gotten $1 billion of credit from the Middle East. So in the middle of this grift, now we discover that, the U.S. Supreme Court and the Wisconsin State Supreme Court, both controlled by conservatives, both of them voted to say, in Wisconsin, this is over the objections of Tony Evers, the governor, who said we want to postpone the election so that we can mail everybody a ballot and we can do this by mail. We'll just postpone it by a month or two. And the Supreme Court said, no, you don't. The statistics all indicate that the majority of Democrats are afraid to leave their homes because they don't want to get sick, and the majority of Republicans think it's no big deal. All they have to do is take some chloroquine. And so, the Republicans are going to show up and vote. The Democrats are going to stay at home, and we're going to win the election. And this is a really important election because the biggest thing at stake here is the Chief Justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Or a right-wing justice. I think she was the Chief Justice, but in any case, a prominent right-wing conservative justice of the Wisconsin Supreme Court. So they forced people to show up. Well, now the results are in. There were preliminary results last week when I shared these with you, but now this is solid. The University of Wisconsin and Ball State University researchers have issued a report, and a Republican congressman recently said, quote, if you look at Wisconsin, I've yet to see a spike or anything in coronavirus cases that anybody has said was statistically significant related to the fact that they had voting. Okay, well, now the study came in. Quote, we find a statistically and economically significant association between in-person voting and the spread of COVID-19 2 to 3 weeks after the Wisconsin election. Furthermore, we find the consolidation of polling locations. You'll recall in Milwaukee, in the largely black part of Milwaukee, they went from over 100, I believe it was 140 or 180 polling places, to 5. So people had to wait in line for hours. Okay. Furthermore, we find the consolidation of polling locations and relatively fewer absentee votes increased positive testing rates 2 to 3 weeks after the election. Wisconsin counties with higher levels of in-person voting per polling location led to increases in the weekly positive rate of COVID-19 tests. Furthermore, counties with higher absentee voting participation, in other words, those counties where more people got their ballots by mail, had lower rates of detecting COVID-19 2 to 3 weeks after the election. So here you go. And right now, Utah, Oregon, Washington State, Hawaii, and Colorado all do all their voting by mail. No sign of fraud. Things are good. Louise and I just voted by mail last weekend. And, and perhaps in the most disgusting grift of all for this administration, Gabe Ortiz, writing over at Daily Kos, roughly 180 children. See, we still have, we now have concentration camps in this country. People ask, well, how is it that the average German didn't ask about the concentration camps? There were 500 of them in Germany, all over the country. Why didn't the average person? Well, think about this. We have concentration camps in the United States. Roughly 180 children continue to remain detained after their parents refused to allow ICE officials to separate their families. This is from Roll Call. They're being presented with a cruel binary choice. Either agree to have their kids released without them or remain jailed together indefinitely. Considering that the administration deported hundreds of parents without their children under this barbaric zero-tolerance policy, and these kids now have been flushed into, some of them are still in children's jails, some of them are in foster homes, some of them have simply vanished, some of them have presumably been sold. This is insane. Federal legislators from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus have pledged an investigation. Trump's family separation policy, said America's Voice director Philly Tobar, remains one of the worst things done by this or any U.S. administration.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Sophie's Choice. If you didn't see the movie, you should, because, it's the world that Steve Miller is trying to create. We'll be back.
By Ruth Marcus, Supreme Ambition, Brett Kavanaugh and the Conservative Takeover. This is from the prologue. Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy had a request. Would President Trump have a few minutes to speak privately? It was April 10th, 2017, a sparkling spring morning in Washington, and Kennedy was at the White House to preside over the ceremonial swearing in of the newest Supreme Court Justice, Neil Gorsuch. First time in history that a sitting justice had sworn in one of his former law clerks to join him on the bench. Just 80 days into Trump's chaotic presidency, the confirmation of Gorsuch represented a rare and welcome victory for the beleaguered new administration, reeling from court defeats of its travel ban and, despite controlling both houses of Congress, unable to repeal President Obama's signature health care law. Perhaps most important, as the prominent conservative lawyers, activists, and judges assembled in the Rose Garden that day understood, Gorsuch's addition was just one step, necessary but not sufficient, in the 3 decades-long conservative bid to cement control over the high court. This effort had been as frustrating as it was lengthy. Seeming opportunities for dominance repeatedly slipped away, with Republican nominees, including Kennedy himself, turning out to be less reliably conservative than advertised. But Republicans have learned from these costly errors, assembling a farm team of potential nominees whose judicial records could be carefully scrutinized to detect any risk of ideological deviation. Gorsuch was among those who came bearing the seal of approval of the Federalist Society, the conservative legal group that had made itself the central actor in this court-shaping exercise and was playing an even more outsized role in the new administration. Trump took pains to single out one man who was not in the Rose Garden that day, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for all he did to make this achievement possible, quoting Trump. Indeed, everyone present knew that McConnell had been the indispensable man leading to that moment. Had it not been for McConnell, President Obama would have filled the vacancy created by Justice Antonin Scalia's sudden death in February 2016, and Justice Merrick Garland would be sitting on the high court, anchoring a newly fortified liberal majority. McConnell, with his audacious announcement that the opening would not be filled, no matter that Obama had 11 months remaining in his term, had avoided that fateful outcome. His intervention meant that Gorsuch now occupied Scalia's seat, a conservative for conservative swap. The next vacancy was almost certain to be the far more critical one, shifting the court's balance instead of affirming it. On that score, all eyes were on the 80-year-old Kennedy, then serving his 30th year on the High Court, and by dint of age, years of service, and political allegiance, the most likely to depart. The swing justice on an already conservative court, Kennedy was pleased about Gorsuch, but he had another former law clerk in mind as he was ushered into Trump's private dining room for an unusual session with the president and White House counsel Don McGahn. Justices are routinely invited to the White House for social events, state dinners, and holiday parties, but at least until Trump took office, such one-on-one meetings were rare in the modern era. With its finicky notions about preserving the appearance of judicial independence, unlike the relaxed days when justices did double duty as private counselors to presidents such as Franklin Roosevelt and Lyndon Johnson. In the chronically leaky Trump White House, aides took pains to keep the Trump-Kennedy meetings secret. There were no public reports about the session, and only a few senior officials ever learned what Kennedy said to Trump that day. The justice's message to the president was as consequential as it was straightforward, and it was a remarkable insertion by a sitting justice into the distinctly presidential act of judge picking. As a candidate, Trump had upended tradition by issuing a list of judges. It ultimately grew to 21, including Gorsuch, from which he pledged to pick his Supreme Court nominees. Now Kennedy had a recommendation for Trump's list. "You named one of my former clerks," Kennedy told Trump. "You should think about another one, Brett Kavanaugh." When Anthony Kennedy spoke, the Trump White House listened, with good reason. During the campaign, when Trump, against all expectations, emerged as the Republican nominee and ultimate victor over Hillary Clinton, the issue of judicial selection had been a utilitarian means to an electoral end. The socially conservative and evangelical voters Trump needed to win were deeply, understandably suspicious of the thrice-married, once Democratic New Yorker. They were particularly dubious about how Trump would approach the critical task of shaping the federal judiciary, especially the Supreme Court. The list of high court candidates that Trump produced with the help of the Federalist Society, upending convention with typical Trumpian bravado, was explicitly aimed at calming their concerns, and it succeeded beyond the wildest expectations of its creators. On Election Day, more than a quarter of Trump voters identified the Supreme Court as the critical factor in determining their vote. White, evangelical, born-again Christians broke 81% for Trump to 16% for Hillary Clinton, meaning that Trump outperformed previous Republican nominees Mitt Romney, John McCain, and George W. Bush among such voters. In office, Trump not only keenly understood the politics of judicial selection and its importance for his reelection, he also gained a new appreciation for what the Supreme Court meant to a president's legacy. Thanks to McConnell's ruthlessness, Trump had inherited what no president had before, the gift of an existing vacancy. Supreme Ambition by Ruth Marcus.
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program. It's coming up on the Science Revolution this week. Dr. Michael Mann is here on heat, sea levels in the Amazon. Oh my. Environmental scientist and writer Dana Nuccitelli drops by on Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans documentary. He explains how it peddles dangerous climate denialism. And journalist David Sirota is exposing the coronavirus cover-up. In Geeky Science, I'm discussing the importance of biodiversity and how the future of the Amazon may depend on tapir poop. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And picking up your thoughts on all this. Oh, by the way, the one quick thing I wanted to share with you. Trump is so committed to pretending that this coronavirus isn't a thing. It's not real, right? It's just a hoax. It ain't real. Go back to work. Because he's so desperate to win re-election, because if he doesn't get re-elected, he probably goes to jail. Or at the very least, he gets outed as a fraud, and his whole criminal empire, the whole Trump crime family collapses. Although I'm guessing that the Kushners, grifters that they are, Jared's dad went to prison for being a grifter, that they've already squirreled away hundreds of millions of dollars that they've, taken out of the Trump companies and out of the various grifts that these guys have run. But he's so committed to getting Americans to go out and expose themselves to the coronavirus on the assumption that it's not going to impact the economy, that the number of people getting sick is not going to be that big a deal, that the red states will be able to cover it up. You got Ron DeSantis down in Florida hiding numbers. You got Nebraska and Iowa now hiding numbers. The governors kind of officially say, we're not going to tell you how many people are dying or how many people are sick. This is probably happening in pretty much every red state where we're going to see an explosion. He's so committed to this grift that he's having lunch with an afternoon meeting with a bunch of Republican senators. And the White House announced early this morning, and this has just gone viral on the internet, on Twitter, the buffet will open early at noon. Now, one of the things that the CDC says restaurants must not do when they reopen is have buffets. Why? Because you don't want people breathing on the food, because now we know just a simple exhalation through your nose can carry these little particles of virus. Not to mention it gets on your hands, and then you use your hands to grab the tongs to put the salad or the green beans or the potato salad or whatever it may be on your plate. And then you set the tongs down, and the next person comes along and picks them up, and now that person's got coronavirus on their hands, and then they sit down and they touch their face, and boom, off to the races. So what is Donald Trump doing in the White House today for the Republican Senate? He's opening a buffet, of course. This, it's almost funny. Anyhow, Mike in Lomita, California. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom, before I get on the point, just a quick note for everybody. Check out the TrumpDeathClock.com, where they are projecting the updates on the amounts they conservatively lay at Trump's door for delaying and dithering when this thing was new. But my main interest in calling was about hydroxychloroquine, and the new publicity that Trump is giving it, and warn people that in case you end up in a trial, to make sure that you have first entry, electrocardiogram, and follow-up during the course of the trial. This follows a piece in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology last week from a Toronto researcher who found that of dozens, I believe it was 155 prospective trials listed on a government website, they lacked that feature. The problem being, of course, that chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine and azithromycin all have the tendency to prolong heart rhythms. And so people who start out with a slow one are more apt to die.
A long queue. Yeah, it's more likely to lead to fibrillation and cardiac failure, heart failure. And that's what they found in that VA study, was that they weren't getting better from the coronavirus, and they were dying in larger numbers from heart failure, and which is one of the known side effects of chloroquine and hydrochloroquine. Absolutely, Mike. So the bottom line of what you're saying is what?
Yeah, insist on cardiology. Testing your heart rhythm first.
Yeah, let's get some real scientists. Well, and don't take these drugs. I mean, there's no evidence that these drugs actually help. I think what we need to do is start a campaign that the White House might pick up on. That the thing that will save you, that will prevent you from getting COVID-19, is bihydrous oxide. Now, bihydrous oxide is a solvent. In fact, it's the most widely used solvent in the world. It will kill you if you drink large quantities of it, or if you inhale even small quantities, relatively small quantities of it. It will kill you. It is powerful stuff, and so like Trump likes things, chloroquine, hydroxychloroquine, it has some dangers, it has some side effects. Well, that must mean it's strong, right? So you say that about the bihydrous oxide. This is a highly effective solvent that can kill you in large quantities, but it might prevent you from getting coronavirus. We need to tell Trump this. What is bihydrous oxide? Bihydrous oxide, bihydrous, 2 hydrogens, oxide, 1 oxygen. It goes by the chemical formula of H2O. Maybe we can convince him. I don't know. Some reporter needs to ask him, do you think bihydrous oxide will help? Mike in Auburn, New York. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Tom, what I would say to Mnuchin and Powell is, congratulations, you've kept liquidity in the system. What's that doing for working people? But exactly. I got one question. For you. I speak for a lot of your fans, a lot of the senators. They want to see you bring back your old rival from RT, S.C. Robinson, for an old.
Yeah, all right. Thanks a lot, Mike. Marie in Southfield, Michigan. Hey, Marie, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
I am well. What's up?
Good. I was, I talked to your the lady that answered the phone. Anyway, I mentioned to her about a while back. You were talking about something called the Blue State Coalition, and I've been thinking more and more about that. And what if just some blue states just decided to secede from the union altogether? I know that's kind of far-fetched, and then take some other states with them. Kind of like, how the states were, for instance, when they got together, the governors got together on the East Coast, and then the coalition on the West Coast that I think included California, or Oregon, Washington, and Nevada. I
wrote an op-ed 3 or 4 weeks ago suggesting this, that what we should do is end the federal income tax, give the billionaires what they want, no more federal income tax, let individual states raise their income tax levels up to 30, 40, 50, 60%, whatever they think is going to be appropriate, since it's replacing the federal income tax. They can also determine, capital gains and corporate income taxes. And then all the blue states get together and create one giant risk pool for a Medicare for All program, and also set their own environmental standards and things like that. And, we can have the blue states versus the red states. Essentially, let's see which concept of how America should works better. Except that that's already been demonstrated. The blue states have higher quality of life. They have longer lifespan. They have lower infant mortality. They have lower levels of venereal disease. They have lower levels of mental illness. Red states have higher levels of all those socially negative factors. And they also red states take a lot more money from the federal government. They're the takers of the country. They're the basket cases of the country. They're the ones that are being bailed out on literally a daily basis by the blue states. And the blue states are the makers. They're the ones who are producing the surpluses. So I am with you, Marie, and I think that that's not a terrible idea at all. Jerry in San Francisco. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm going to keep in the theme of grifting. And a friend of mine told me that take a look at the Patriot Act. In it, they give some kind of scenario, and I think you covered this maybe in your Hidden History of the War on Voting, your book. They show a number of scenarios where actually Congress and even the executive branch could suspend the election. And I was wondering your take on that.
To the best of my knowledge, there are no scenarios under which Congress can suspend the election.
Well, it says, right, this is verbatim from the Patriot Act, says, under a variety of possible scenarios that could arise as a result of a terrorist attack before or during an election, either the Congress or the states might pass legislation which would affect the timing of these elections.
Right. My point, there is no such legislation right now. And it would have to be, if you wanted to bring that into law, it would take both the House and the Senate, and no way Nancy Pelosi is going to go with that. And in individual states, I don't know of any state that has proposed legislation to postpone elections. That's the kind of thing where you wouldn't just get... Yeah, don't worry about it, Jerry. That's the kind of thing where, you would get outrage from the right as well as the left. But what they are, in my opinion, planning on doing is, in a number of states, basically preventing people from voting by mail on the assumption that Republicans are more likely, and the proof of this, by the way, is, just look at, you go into these bars where these people are congregating without masks and high densities, and you ask them, where do they get their news? Oh, Rush Limbaugh and Fox News. So the theory is Republicans are more likely to go out and vote. Democrats are more likely to stay home and be afraid of getting sick. And as a consequence, Republicans are going to win the elections if they can keep this virus going into the election. That's the Republican strategy, as far as I can tell right now, or at least part of it, for November of this year. We'll be back. And thank you, Jerry, for the call. We'll be back. It's 45 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
How do we stop the grift? Or is it just going to take a wholesale basically repudiation of the Republican Party to stop it. And welcome back. Jared in Downington, Pennsylvania. Hey, Jared, what's on your mind today?
Hello, Tom. Just a little bit of a correction when you said we just now have concentration camps in this country. We've had concentration camps in this country for a long time, like what they did to the Indians, the slave-holding centers we had, the Japanese internment camps. So, I mean, these are things that the Nazis adopted and the Japanese adopted as their models, too. So let's not try to whitewash our history there. But I want to talk about the grift. Yep, I want to talk about the grift that's going on in the Republican Party. I would argue that if you want to get rid of the grift, the number one thing you should do is abolish capitalism. This is what is enabling this grift to occur and continue. And I know I sound like a broken record all the time, ranting and raving about capitalism, but it really is pretty much the great demon that has to be slayed if we are to survive as a species. That the idea that, you know, profit comes before people's lives is an inherently anti-human position, and we need to start moving away from that. And the only thing I can think of that we can do to advocate moving away from capitalism is just educating people. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
So,
there's
Jared,
no way we can
educate me. We've got this new system that Jared just invented, a new political and economic system here in the United States. And I'm an inventor, and I've got a really cool idea to start a business. And it's going to manufacture widgets, or it's going to provide a service that doesn't exist right now. But I don't have the money to do it. So, but there's a guy down the street from me who is a very wealthy guy, and he does have the money to do it, and I'm more than willing to give him 10, 20% of my company in exchange for his funding it so that I can make it work. That's called capitalism. How do I get the money to start my business, assuming that I have a reasonably good business idea, in the world that you're proposing?
Well, I mean, in the world I'm proposing, the government would obviously be funding these kinds of things, but you get to the point of...
Well, then how do you keep the government from funding things like, you know, Jared Kushner and Donald Trump? I mean, who's going to decide what's a good program without, I mean, this is... I'm not a diehard, die-in-the-wool capitalist, Jared. I think you know that. But I do think that there are some aspects of capitalism that really probably should be preserved. And markets, when they operate within reasonable boundaries, for example, I'm all in favor of employee ownership of businesses. One way might be if I could go out and find a whole bunch of people who are willing to work for me for free for 6 months to put this thing together. But that's not going to happen if you don't have a national health care system and universal basic income.
Well, none of this is going to happen until we have a government that at least puts that the markets are framed for the workers. We have to have a state that is a worker state. That is
right. Well, that's what Germany has, where any company with over 1,000 employees has to have half their board of directors made up of members of the employees union. I mean, that's a good start in the right direction, isn't it?
Yes, but how do we get there?
Well, it was done legislatively. You pass a law requiring it. It would have to be done on a state-by-state basis because of state charters. And I would start with Delaware, which is where half the companies in this country are domiciled. Hey, Thom Hartmann here. I have a new book out. It's called The Hidden History of Monopolies, How Big Business Destroyed the American Dream, and Ralph Nader wrote the foreword. It's available for pre-order wherever you find fine books. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE to, or whoever's running them, to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Dennis in Aptos, California. Hey, Dennis, what's up?
Yeah, hi. I wanted to bring up what you said yesterday about Francisco Franco and the type of fascism they had there, and what might be down the road for here if Trump, despite the fact that he could lose the election, would refuse to leave office, and if he had enough military support and the support of the AK-47 tote-carrying Michigan-type people, he could possibly declare himself POTUS for life. And he's got that role model. Franco never paid for his crimes, unlike Ceausescu, let's just say, or Mussolini. There was another dictator, Antonio Salazar, Portugal, ruled Portugal around the same time Franco ruled Spain. So somebody a few years ago told me that Trump always gets away with it. And I hope that is not going to be true. I hope Biden wins and he does step down. Trump does step down. I hope that he does get indicted. And I would hope that he would end up in prison. And basically, that's all I've got to say.
Okay, Dennis, the one thing that I would point out in the context of the Spanish Civil War and the rise of Franco is, correct me if I'm wrong on this, I read it in high school, and I'm not sure I read the whole book, or maybe I read the Cliff Notes version of Hemingway's. Wasn't it The Sun Also Rises? His book about going to his novel about going to Spain and fighting in the war on behalf of Franco. That Franco and the fascists had basically convinced the rest of the world that they were fighting communists, and therefore, and when actually it was socialists, and therefore we needed to have a revolution against them, and that revolution turned into a full-blown fascist government. Do I have that right?
You pretty much do. The Catholic Church wanted to get back as the state religion of Spain as well. And sure, they didn't want to have any sort of democracy. They wanted Spain to be ruled as it was during the Middle Ages, during the feudal times. And basically
bring back the strongman, essentially. Bring back the strongman. And that whole macho thing. I mean, Hemingway totally bought into that. And I can easily see Americans buying into that macho thing. And that's these guys who show up at these rallies with swastikas and and AR-15s. They think they're being macho. They think they're being tough. And they believe that this all makes them look tough and all that kind of stuff. And, it's a very seductive thing, particularly for men who are a little bit insecure. Whether they're sexually insecure, financially insecure, socially insecure, whatever. It's very appealing to, and Hemingway was a classic example of that, by the way, if you look at his life. And I think that was what appealed to him, this whole macho concept. And that's what Trump is trying to sell, this obese billionaire with a giant comb over who puts makeup on every day, massive amounts of makeup, is being viewed as and characterizing himself as the most macho president we've ever had. It's bizarre. I don't know how to say it beyond that. Dennis, thank you for the call. Robert in Omaha, Nebraska. Hey, Robert, what's up?
I know how to get rid of the grifters.
Okay, how?
You have to vote them out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, step by step. Thank you. That's a good one. Robert in Columbia, Tennessee. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hey, Tom, thank you. I throw this out to you. This is going to turn things on the other direction. Why would we participate in an election in November and take the chance of Donald Trump being reelected, when I think you would agree that the United States and the rest of the world cannot afford to have another 4 years of Donald Trump. And
because postponing the election would postpone the inauguration, and we can't have one more day of Donald Trump beyond January 20th.
Yeah, true, but doesn't his term end regardless on January 20th, 2021?
Well, that's a good question. That's a very interesting question.
Let me say this, Tom, if I could, very quickly. You often point out what the Republicans are going to do, what they have done, and it's going to get worse, in suppressing the vote, cheating in every way possible. Would you take a baseball team you owned and go play another team, and you knew the other team had no intention of playing by the rules? You would not participate. I say don't participate. Don't put a candidate forward until the Republican Party, so-called Republican Party, puts a stop to this madness. This man has cost countless lives. You know, Tommy said
they're not going to stop, Robert.
On Fifth Avenue.
They don't care.
He's done it.
They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. They're going to keep the grift going. They've been running this grift on America since 1980, Robert.
So we got to blow it up, Tom.
I think we need to blow it up at the ballot box. I mean, you know, a baseball game, my life doesn't depend on the outcome of a baseball game. Your life doesn't depend on the outcome of a baseball game. And even the baseball players' lives don't depend on it, although their income may. But, you know, our lives depend on whether Donald Trump is in the White House beyond the end of this year. At least I believe they do. And certainly our democracy depends on getting him out of office, because he's a clear and present danger to democracy.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace, a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, MD, as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina's State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty, his Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, head rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African-American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington.
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com.
He found the gun, and it continues from there. Just Another N-Word, My Life in the Black Panther Party by Field Marshal Don Cox.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is the Harvard-educated attorney, professor at the University of New Hampshire, author of 11 books, including Proof of Conspiracy, Proof of Collusion, and his forthcoming book, which I believe you can pre-order wherever you find fine books, Proof of Corruption, Bribery, Impeachment, and Pandemic in the Age of Trump. Seth Abramson. Seth Abramson, SethAbramson.net is his website, and you can tweet him at Seth Abramson. He's got a spectacularly active Twitter feed, really somebody worth following. Seth, welcome back to the program. It's been a while since we talked. You tweeted a couple days ago that when Trump started pushing this hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, that there was actually a reason beyond just his desire to distract us from his involvement in the Mike Pompeo Inspector General scandal. First of all, welcome to the show, and number two, you want to tell us about that?
Thank you for having me, Tom. And just to give your listeners sort of the brief timeline, President Trump begins pushing hydroxychloroquine in March of 2020 alongside the antibiotic azithromycin. And prescriptions for the drug jumped 46 times immediately after that, according to the New York Times. We had our first
4,600%.
That's correct. And we had our first person dying from taking chloroquine shortly after the president pushed that drug. A man in Arizona took chloroquine phosphate. He died. His wife was hospitalized. His wife said that they were guided by Trump. So right away, the problems with someone who's not a medical doctor giving that sort of advice were evident in the data and in the actual results in terms of mortality. But what you're referring to comes in early April when we learned that Bernard Marcus, a Trump mega donor who's co-founder of the Job Creators Network, he calls on Trump publicly to, quote unquote, cut the red tape on hydroxychloroquine. We don't know if he had spoken previously to Trump about it or not. In March or in April or thereafter. But we do know that Bernard Marcus had already announced by that point that he would spend a big part of his fortune, he is mega rich, to reelect Donald Trump. We also, I just want to note, because I didn't say this in my tweet online, that we learned the next day from MarketWatch that Donald Trump has a quote-unquote more than modest sum invested in the French drug maker that makes the brand name version of hydroxychloroquine. It was after that point that we had all these studies showing it was dangerous, caused heart problems, caused death, had no therapeutic value for people with COVID-19. And it was after that point that Rick Bright was removed from his post for opposing the expansion of the hydroxychloroquine push in the Trump administration. And somehow, after all this happens, in early May, Donald Trump starts taking the drug and decides to tell the country that he's taking it just recently, knowing all the dangers, knowing all the conflicts of interest, knowing that death has already been caused by this, knowing that there could be a drug shortage because of his public statement. It's an astoundingly irresponsible action by the President of the United States.
Now, I read a few weeks ago, and thank you, Seth, for that great summary. I read a few weeks ago that there was evidence that 3 different Trump family foundations, the Trump company is an accumulation of hundreds of smaller companies, and they kind of play this shell game, moving money around to minimize taxes and things, and apparently screw investors if you look at how he ran his casinos. That 3 different Trump family foundations were invested in, I believe it was Sanofi, the French company that makes Plaquenil, if I have that right, the brand name version of hydrochloroquine. Has that been verified?
It is verified, yes, that he has more than a modest sum invested in a fund that he may not directly control, but he's aware that his economic fortunes are tied to some degree with that French drug maker that makes Plaquenil. That's correct.
Now, there's also a story about Laura Ingraham going to the White House, bringing some doctor, some MD with her, who is a big fan of chloroquine, and doing a PowerPoint presentation, a private PowerPoint presentation for Trump and maybe a few other people, I don't know who is in the room, pitching the idea that not only is this a treatment for COVID-19, but it can actually prevent you from getting COVID-19. That seems like, I mean, he's a very gullible guy, right? He sees something on Fox News, regardless of the source, he immediately starts tweeting and talking about it. And very often there are things that are, frankly, humiliating to him. They're so wrong or so stupid. But he's a very, what's the old saying? It's easy. The easiest person to sell something to is a salesman. And Trump seems to be the case. I mean, is it possible that this is just a case of, Laura and her friends over at Fox thought they had something, maybe with without a financial motive. Everybody at that point was looking for a magic bullet so that we could all get back to work, and if we get sick, we could just pop a pill. And that this was just, wishful thinking on steroids rather than some sort of an elaborate grift in order to increase the wealth of one of Donald Trump's investment funds?
Well, I certainly don't want to put aside the possibility that there were people who were within Donald Trump's inner circle who, for the best of intentions, believed that, though granted without any medical evidence whatsoever, believed that this could have a therapeutic effect or something even beyond that. Certainly there's a history with this president of making phone calls to people who don't have expertise in what he asks them to advise him on, making presentations to him despite not having expertise, and doing all of that in the face of ignoring those who do have the expertise. But I think, Tom, the reason I have this concern about this Trump mega donor is if you know that someone who is a mega donor to your campaign, who has said he will spend part of his fortune to reelect you, can make millions, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars, then where do you think that money is going to end up? It'll end up in your campaign through donations from that person. And that's the concern that you have, is that on the other hand, he might expect to see that money effectively laundered through sort of regular course of business, super PAC donations from that individual or his operation, the Job Creators Network.
Oh, amazing. So this gets down to basically an election grift more than a financial grift. Astonishing. Seth, we're talking with Seth Abramson, the professor at the University of New Hampshire, author of 11 books. His most recent, or his newest one, is coming out soon, Proof of Corruption. Confirm for me that I can pre-order this, at Powell's Books or Amazon or wherever I might want to. And it's out in September. And can you let us know, just a couple of examples. We have about a minute and a half left before we're going to hit a hard break here. A couple of examples of proof of corruption on the part of Trump.
So you can pre-order the book, you're correct, anywhere that you can order books. And what the book essentially is, it's a massive 525-page book that lays out 7 separate Trump bribery scandals. And that includes China, Turkey, Venezuela, his actions in Ukraine, of course, but also these bribery scandals, 2 of them connected to COVID-19, the one that we've been talking about, and also the fact that he received intelligence about COVID-19 in November 2019. We know this from ABC News and the Times of Israel. He did not take action. He would not hear any bad word said about Xi Jinping. And this was at a time that Xi Jinping, we know from the Financial Times, had given dirt on Joe Biden to Michael Pillsbury, Trump's trade representative in China. So you have a transaction between Trump and the Chinese government at a time that he refuses to hear intelligence about China not being transparent in November 2019 and December 2019 about COVID-19. So that's one example. But what I lay out in my tweets is, frankly, the most upsetting of these is Donald Trump's business interests in Turkey and how they affected his willingness to allow Turkey to invade Syria and commit genocide against our allies, the Kurds. It was clearly motivated, and I lay this out in the book, by his business interests.
That's mind-boggling. And let's not forget, Michael Flynn had taken $500,000 from Turkey. He was an agent for Turkey when he was Trump's, national security advisor. It's amazing. Seth Abramson, abramson.net is the website, and of course his new book, Proof of Corruption, available wherever fine books are available. Seth, thanks so much for dropping by today. Great talking with you.
Thanks, Tom.
Is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We will be right back. It's 15 minutes past the hour. More of the news of the day and your calls right after this. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where despair is not an option. And welcome back. Let's see here. Mark in Costa Mesa, California. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, Tom. The third time calling. I really appreciate you taking my call. I was going to talk to you about what this Seth Abramson just talked about. I wanted to make a brief comment about that, and also about the cages for the immigrants, if I could. Sure. They both are connected. I believe, because I always go on the premise that Trump just cares about himself, Trump, and money and power. Though he doesn't really care about us, our health. He doesn't care about. He's not worried about people coming across the border and hurting us. But the cages, and I think he's financially. Like Seth is going to bring out in his book, I think every Democrat in the Senate, after they have the majority, should get this book and use it as a checkoff list.
Yeah, and we need to look into whether Trump is invested in these private for-profit prison companies that are getting $700 a day to keep children in cages.
Yes, I totally agree. But those cages. I mean, and I think he, just like what Mr. Abramson was saying about, he's getting the money somehow. Whether it's into his, it's what's in it for me is what Trump says, and it's like he's getting that money somehow. But the cages, they aren't going to go away. Whoever's making money and Trump making money on the $700 a day per person per cage, my prediction is those it's going to be. This could all lead to really a monstrosity. Like these cages aren't going to go away. They could be used for left-wing, political, peaceful rallies. Use those buses, gather them up, put them in the cages. To $700 a day per person, waiting for their time in court.
This is what happened in Germany in the 30s, in the mid-30s. They started arresting, they didn't start arresting Jews. They started arresting trade unionists and people who were members of the Communist Party. That's where it started.
Yes, I'm not connected with anybody for this intelligence. I'm 74 years old. I'm housebound. My brain has way too much time to think. But what I feel is that we could someday have people come to our doors. If the people that are bad mouthing Trump and other things on Facebook can be taken away, $700 a day, waiting for day in court. It can come to that. I really feel.
Watch what you tweet. Watch what you post. Is that what you're saying?
Well, we're living in a country where we can, but we have to maintain it. I think because Trump he sees these things we say. He sees the cartoons and he sees what we say, and he tries not to. He tries to listen to people that just tell him how great he is. But he's part of what he does in life is get even. If he has control of Facebook, then he can start getting even with people somehow.
I agree, Mark, and it concerns me tremendously because I'm probably at the top of that pile, or among the people at the top of that pile that he would want to come after. And I haven't let it shut me up, but it does wake me up in the middle of the night occasionally. Mark, thank you for the call. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 20 minutes past 3.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Hey, we have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for people who are supporters of our program. On this one, I'm digging into, or actually kind of taking issue with, a new article that's over on thenation.com titled, Could Coronavirus End Globalization? And they've got a bunch of analysts who are weighing in on this sort of thing. And my take is that this is going to be even bigger than that. This depression that we are sliding into is being softened right now by the Federal Reserve throwing $6 trillion at America's largest corporations. 1/3 of all economic activity for a year in the United States. Twice the annual federal budget. The Fed has just parked $6 trillion with a couple of hundred big companies. And it's just masking what's coming. It's going to get bad, and it could become fascist. And so check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com, for the people who support our program. Thank you. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A few other things in the news I wanted to share with you, by the way. A number of people have tweeted me that I was saying bihydrous oxide. It's actually dihydrogen monoxide, right? And there, in fact, somebody, let me get back over to the Twitter feed here. Somebody, here it is. For American Values tweeted an alert. Danger. Dihydrogen monoxide is colorless and odorless. Accidental inhalation of DMHO may be fatal. Prolonged exposure to its solid form causes severe tissue damage. Symptoms that would be ice, right? Symptoms of DHMO ingestion can include excessive sweating and urination, and possibly a bloated feeling, nausea, vomiting, and bodily electrolyte imbalance. So it's dihydrogen. Well, he says dihydrogen oxide. For American Values says, Craig Baer says it's dihydrogen monoxide. I guess there's a bunch of different ways you can say H2O, right? But I am waiting for the day that some reporter asks Trump, well, what about dihydrogen monoxide? Understand that might be helpful with coronavirus. And Trump starts going, oh, that's kind of cool. Yeah, dihydrogen monoxide. We need to look into this. I mean, he's just dumb enough. Anyway, Larry in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Larry, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Going back to your interesting little discussion with the fellow about the Spanish Civil War. Down here, Asheville is a blue island, but it's in a sort of a sea of red. As a rent refugee, I live on the edge of town. I hear the automatic gunfire, angry guys in giant pickup trucks. And I run with a fairly sensible, progressive crowd, and we've all been discussing how those that look at history see this starting to resemble the lead-up to the Spanish Civil War, where the pointy-headed intellectuals and people who aren't really religious and support access to abortion and the whole list of issues are confronted by the folks that want to turn back the clock and have a thug professional wrestler as a leader and reinstitute the control
Is Franco
of the church.
A professional wrestler?
Well, visually.
Oh. Yeah, so not actually. Larry, the Spanish Civil War, I mean, outside of reading Hemingway's book or the Cliff Notes version, I don't recall, frankly, which one I had to read in order to do the book report. But outside of that, I don't know very much about the Spanish Civil War. Is there a good, short history of the Spanish Civil War that you'd recommend?
I am not a real deep scholar on it. I just know the basics and to see the similarities with basically the anti-intellectualism that's going on. That you can just taste it out there.
Oh yeah, Nixon really was big on that. He talked about the pointy-headed intellectuals and the ivory tower liberals and all that kind of stuff. Excellent points, Larry. Yeah, well, that was Spiro Agnew's phrase, nattering nabobs of negativism.
Exactly.
Yep. Larry, thank you.
It could get a little serious coming up to an election when he gets booted out, but his cadre is not going to accept it.
Oh, it's already serious. We've got people with guns threatening elected officials and walking around with nooses and swastikas. That's serious. Larry, thank you for the call. Ramon in San Francisco. Hey, Ramon, what's up? Thanks for listening to iHeartRadio there.
Thank you. Yeah, Tom, read the book For Whom the Bell Tolls, and it will give you an idea about the background of the Civil War. And
was that Hemingway's book about the Spanish Civil War? For Whom the Bell Tolls?
Yeah. Jordan.
Okay.
That was the hero. Yeah, so I'll give you an idea. Well, the other gentleman, Elliot, explained the whole thing where I was going to talk about the hydrochloroquine, whatever they call it. But since I have another idea. See, I was watching Trump, and he was saying that when Boris Johnson in England was getting better, he said, I sent you a load, he said, of a therapeutic so he could get better. He had never mentioned that word. And I think that's what he's using, interferon 2B, which is alpha interferon. It brings you up, it boosts you up with your immune system. And that's why
alpha interferon.
And that's why he doesn't wear a mask. But this is expensive medicine. I was reading that it costs about $700 a shot. And they make it here, but the Cubans make it very accessible, low price. And that's what they sent to China and then to Italy and then to Spain. Why do you think they got better? Because the interferon. And who gave it to them? The Cubans with the Chinese technology. But that's what it is. So he mentioned that he sent a load, he said, to Boris Johnson. So he must be taking that because he was sick before. On March, the first week, he was swearing. He could barely talk. He was slurring. I don't know, because he's doing some emerald or whatever he does. Sneeze.
Yeah, I'm increasingly convinced that he is crushing up and snorting Adderall. I mean, you know, this guy who worked with him on Celebrity Apprentice said he was doing that back, you know, when he was working with NBC. So, you know, it's entirely possible. It's bizarre, but it's entirely possible. Ramon, thanks a lot for the call. Who knows? Who knows? We'll be back after this short break with more of your calls on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's Viagra for your brain. Just don't tell Limbaugh he'll want some. Stick around.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is called Let the People Pick the President, The Case for Abolishing the Electoral College by Jesse Wegman. And I'm reading from the introduction. This is page 20. But what exactly can we do about the Electoral College? People have been trying to answer that question for more than 2 centuries. Since the first proposed amendment to the Electoral College was introduced in Congress in 1797, there have been more than 700 attempts to reform or abolish it, more by far than any other provision of the Constitution. Only one has succeeded, the 12th Amendment, which was ratified in 1804 to fix a technical flaw in the college's design, but left it otherwise intact. In the late 1960s, an amendment abolishing the college and replacing it with a national popular vote passed the House of Representatives and came extraordinarily close in the Senate, but was blocked by a filibuster. At the time, 80% of the American public supported switching to the popular vote, as did President Richard Nixon and other top Republicans and Democrats. To some, this litany of failures speaks to itself. I think it's a waste of time to talk about changing the Electoral College, former President Jimmy Carter said in 2000. Carter had supported a national popular vote in the 60s and the 70s. I would predict that 200 years from now, we'll still have the Electoral College, he said. Was President Carter right? Is it simply our fate as Americans to remain trapped by the historical quirks of a Constitution that is too easy to revere and too hard to change? Especially after the failed effort in the 60s, when American politics were far less polarized to today, and there was no simple partisan divide over the issue. It's clear that a constitutional amendment is not in the cards. But there may be another way. It's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, an agreement among states to award all of their electors to the winner of the national popular vote, rather than the winner of their statewide vote. The compact will take effect when it is joined by states representing a majority of electoral votes, 270, thus guaranteeing that the candidate who wins the most votes in the country becomes president. The ingenuity of the compact is that it doesn't touch the Constitution. Its target is the statewide winner-take-all rule, currently in use in 48 states. Maine and Nebraska are the exceptions. This rule is what makes presidents out of popular vote losers. It incentivizes presidential campaigns to ignore more than 100 million American voters living in non-competitive states turning what should be a national electoral contest into a series of bitter, hyper-local brawls. It focuses nearly all campaign spending and policy proposals on a few so-called battleground states, where even a small shift in voting can lead to an electoral jackpot for one side or another. That familiar red and blue map we all obsess over every 4 years, it's nothing but a visual representation of state winner-take-all rules, with each state stamped Democratic or Republican as though that is its true identity, regardless of how many voters from the other party cast a ballot there. This is bad for democracy, and it should concern all Americans, no matter where they live or which political party they support. In contrast, when candidates know that all votes are equal, and they need a majority of them to win, they're forced to seek the support of all Americans and craft policies that appeal to as many people as possible. The Popular Vote Compact was launched in 2006 and got its first member state, Maryland, the following year. As of October 2019, 15 states in the District of Columbia, together representing 196 electoral votes, had joined. 74 more, and the compact takes effect. So far, only Democratic majority states have joined the compact. And while the 2016 election dealt a significant setback to efforts to enlist Republican-led states, lawmakers of both parties around the country continue to support it, and Republican-led chambers have passed it in 4 states. Critics of the compact call it an end run around the Constitution. And it's true that the Constitution's framers never mentioned something like a popular vote compact. They also never mentioned the winner-take-all rule, but that didn't stop the majority of states from rapidly adopting it to benefit themselves. That's the whole point of the compact. The framers gave states near total control over how to allocate their electors. The fact that the compact is an agreement among states also means that, unlike a constitutional amendment, which is effectively permanent, member states may back out if they later decide they don't want to be a part of it. Opponents of the popular vote argue that no matter how you might achieve it, it's not the way our country is built. As the popular saying goes, we're a republic, not a democracy. The Electoral College is one of the core Republican elements of the framers' constitutional design, like the Senate and the Supreme Court, which are there precisely to prevent majorities from running rampant. In other words, majority rule is not our only organizing principle, and perhaps not even our most important. There are 2 problems, however, with this argument. The minor one is on the surface and involves terminology. The United States is both a republic and a representative democracy. The 2 terms describe the same thing: a government in which the people hold the ultimate power but elect representatives to make laws, policies, and other decisions on their behalf. The founders used the term republic to distinguish what they were building from a monarchy. For them, democracy generally referred to the direct variety, as in ancient Athens or the New England town meeting, where the people literally make the laws themselves. But American politics at the national level has never been and never will be a direct democracy. So any distinction between the terms today is meaningless. As one political columnist put it, to say that the U.S. is a republic and not a democracy is like claiming to eat beef and pork, but not cows and pigs. The bigger problem with the saying is the implication that lies beneath it. The book, Let the People Pick the President, by Jesse Wegman.
Coming up on the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Michael Mann is here on heat, sea levels in the Amazon. Oh my. Environmental scientist and writer Dana Nuccitelli drops by on Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans documentary. He explains how it peddles dangerous climate denialism. And journalist David Sirota is exposing the coronavirus cover-up. In Geeky Science, I'm discussing the importance of biodiversity and how the future of the Amazon may depend on tapir poop. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available. We have a new video over at thomhartmann.com for the people who support our program, and it's an interesting one. The phrase, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, has a really interesting history, and the exploitation of that phrase and that history by right-wingers in 20th century America, or late 20th century America, now 21st century America, also has a fascinating and rather grim history. Just the general absurdity of the idea that somebody can lift themselves off the ground by reaching down and pulling on a strap on their boots. I mean, just think about it for a second. But it's used, this is used as justification by right-wingers particularly over the last 40 years since the Reagan Revolution, to say, oh, poor people, their poverty is their own fault. Check it out. It's over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I've been seeing these promos on CNN for this special documentary that's coming out about the woman behind Roe v. Wade. Her name is Norma McCorvey. And I remember back 10, 15 years ago, maybe longer, sometime in the last couple of decades, that she was revealed to the world as the person who was Jane Roe behind Roe v. Wade, who wanted to get an abortion back in 72, ended up before the court in the decision in 73. And that she had come out and said publicly that she was really sad that she had an abortion and she wished she never had, or, words to that effect. That was my recollection, and it was an accurate recollection, but what is surprising, apparently the documentary is not out yet, but they're releasing copies to the press to watch, and there's a review of it over at rawstory.com that says basically, she said this on camera before she died in 2017, that, excuse me just a second, pardon me, that this is my deathbed confession. She said that she was a big fish, a trophy, that the religious right paid. She said, I think it was a mutual thing. I took their money, and they took me out in front of the cameras and told me what to say, and that's what I'd say. I'm a good actress, she added. Of course, I'm not acting now. She adds, and this is remarkable, the film is out on May 22nd, which is, 3 days from now. She said, quote, I wonder how many abortions Donald Trump is responsible for. I'm sure he's lost count, but if he can count that high. And then she goes on to say, if a young woman wants to have an abortion, fine, that's no skin off my ass. That's why they call it choice. It's your choice. So we're discovering now that the religious right and the political conservatives who exploit, abortion as a political issue actually paid her to go on TV and lie. That's breathtaking. Anyhow, pick up your phone calls here. Mike in Cartersville, Georgia. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, how are you, Tom?
Good.
I just wanted to mention a couple things about the Spanish experience that I had when we were there. My daughter lived in Spain for a while, and this was back in the 90s, and we went to spend some time there. And I remember distinctly that if you bring up, we were pretty innocent about this, and if you bring up the Spanish Civil War, if you did then, it was a surefire way to kill conversation in the room.
Isn't Guernica that famous painting commemorating a slaughter during the Spanish Civil War? Was that a slaughter done by the fascists, the Francoites?
Yes, it was done by the German Luftwaffe.
Thank you.
There was a lot of foreign support for the phalangists or the nationalist side, Franco's people. The Soviets sent a little bit of help to the nationalists, and there were about 35,000 or so foreigners who volunteered to help the nationalists, including about fewer than 3,000 Americans, I think, were involved in it.
Including Ernie Hemingway. Including Ernest Hemingway.
Hemingway was there to cover it. He was with his...
Well, he was driving an ambulance too, wasn't he?
That was during World War I. He was an ambulance driver in Italy in World War I in the Italian front.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yes, thank you.
And and he was with his mistress at the time in the Spanish Civil War, Martha Gellman, who was an American journalist, and she was later to be his, I think, third wife, but. They all would hang out at a place called the Hotel Florida in Madrid. It was a nationalist hangout, and there's a terrific book by a woman named Amanda Vale that may be available through Amazon still, called Hotel Florida, about that experience.
So, Mike, I'm so happy that, to have somebody call in who knows what they're talking about in regard to this, because I clearly don't. What are the lessons that we Americans today can learn as we're watching the rise of a semi or pseudo-fascist, right-wing movement within the United States, much like what arose in Spain in the lead up to the Spanish Civil War? Are there analogies? Are there parallels? Are there lessons to learn? Or is it just a complete case of different time, different place, different circumstances?
I think there are, and I think the main thing is to not be apathetic. When this was going on, Britain, France, most of the European democracies stood back and gave no support to the Republican forces in Spain. Now those forces were painted by Franco and his people as being far left communists, and they were more like center left. They were socially liberal. They were anti-clerical. They were for basically.
Wasn't the union movement a big part of that?
Yes, it was, and that's one of the reasons that the Americans came in the form of the Abraham Lincoln Brigade. There was like I said,
crush the
3,000 of them. A lot of them had been union organizers and union people who had gone there to support, the more liberalized society. Yeah,
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay.
About 80 of those people were African American, which struck me as odd. I saw some photos of them there, and a lot of African American. Well, not a lot. There were only 80 or so that showed up, but the fact that they were there at all to support civil rights in Spain was remarkable to me, and I thought it was a terrific statement by those people.
So maybe I'm completely misunderstanding this, Mike. I thought that the Americans who went to Spain fought and assisted the side of the fascists, not the side of the. Oh, really? So we fought against Franco's people.
Yes, it was people who had been disenchanted by the Depression, who had seen fascism on the rise in Europe, and who were there to support labor and to support the people. Hemingway was very early supporter of the Republic.
What's the name of that author who the Hotel Florida book?
Amanda, I believe, Vail, Vaill. It's got a subtitle, and I don't remember. It's like Truth, Love,
okay, I'll
and
find
Death,
it.
and something like that. I don't remember.
Yeah,
but
I'll track it down.
It's a fascinating, but it's a good read, and it came out about 2014, and I think it may be available through Amazon.
Yeah. Okay.
If you're interested.
I'll have to check it out.
But
Mike, I got to move along, but thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really.
I was a little concerned that you were getting the American participation in that backwards. And
I did.
It's very
obviously
important that this was.
Thank you so much for correcting me.
Very liberal part of the American people.
Great. Thank you, Mike. I very much appreciate that. I hate it when I get things wrong, and I'm sure people listening do too, and that's why I want to correct them as quickly as possible. Thank you, Mike. I owe you. Tim in Los Angeles. Hey, Tim, what's up?
We forgive you. Anyway, thank you for taking my call. Got a blast from the past. You probably remember this well. Evil is live spelt backwards.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to throw that in there that, and if you're not part of the solution, you must be part of the problem. So, it's like, every time every time I eat some junk food that I know is not good for me, or smoke a joint when I know I could be taking an edible or something, I'm part of the problem, right? I'm part of the evil.
Well, that's certainly the list. The British conservative back in the late 1700s said, the only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good men to do nothing, and that's certainly been the lust of history. Tim, thanks for the call. We saw that with the rise of fascists in Spain. We saw it with the rise of fascists in Italy. We saw it with the rise of fascists in Germany. We're watching that right now with the rise of fascists in Brazil and in the Philippines, in Turkey, in Egypt, I mean, all around the world, you've got fascistic governments rising up and creating coalitions with Donald Trump.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
You would think we would figure out some of the lessons of history. We'll be back. And welcome back. Alan in Seattle. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Oh, well, the grift keeps going on. Back to the first hour there. Yeah, the American average American worker isn't getting rich off of what the government, that $1,200 check, or the $600 unemployment insurance, because all that money has to be prioritized, and they're just sending it back to the landlords and the banks and the credit card companies. Nobody's getting any better, off this government largesse, except for the wealthy. So even with Mnuchin and Powell sending money, billions to the corporations, they're sending almost nothing to the people. And it's all still.
Well, on top of that, Alan, you've got this weird thing where Elizabeth Warren is calling for criminal penalties against companies that misuse these funds. And Mitch McConnell is calling for an absolute end to prosecution of corporations for things that they might do that might harm their employees or their customers. It's like, light and dark, night and day. It's amazing.
Right. It's like your previous caller said, evil and live. They're opposite sides. So what's the solution? Well, instead of just, handing out government money, let's pay these people a living wage. Let's give them universal health care so we don't have to do this.
Right, and let's cancel student debt. I'm
exactly.
with you. Alan, well said. Thank you very much. That was brilliant. Liz in California, in Los Angeles. Hey, Liz, what's up?
Boy, I always learn so much from your show. Not only from you,
Thank you.
but
Me
from
too.
A lot of yeah. Anyway, what I was calling about was I think there should be some equity. If Bush, if I was thinking of Bushy Boy when he was president, he was a deserter, and then he starts a war like this deserter who should have been prosecuted and thrown into jail, and so I think anybody that's in power like that, a president, if he advocates for war, then his children should be the first on the beach, not in some cushy office job, but his daughters should have been right on the beach. And I think the same with Trump. His son, who obviously has some sort of disability, should be in one of those little concentration camps. And Ivanka's children should all be in those, just for 2 weeks, just for a tryout, to see that it's okay. And
just to show us how humane it is, you mean?
Yes, exactly. So that's what I have to say.
Oh, okay. You said it very well. Thank you very much. I appreciate the call. Charisse in Poulsbo, Washington. Hey, Charisse, what's up?
Hi. I've read an article last week or a couple days ago written by Matt Taibbi, I'm pretty sure, where he was talking about what Congress forgot in the mortgage forbearance program. And he said that by law, the mortgage companies are supposed to give you the 3 months if you apply for forbearance. And there's not supposed to be a balloon payment at the end of this 3 months, which is why people aren't taking advantage of it. But that what Congress forgot was that the mortgages are bundled into bonds. And so the person you're contacting is a mortgage servicing company, and they don't have the reserves to allow you to go 3 months because they still have to make their monthly payment to the bondholder.
That's correct. And I read that piece by Matt Taibbi, and it was brilliant. It's on his website and spot on. And by the way, there's supposed to be a renewal for an additional 3 months as well. And they're lying to people left and right. Charisse, thank you for raising that. Thank you. So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and it's there's a really troubling concatenation of events events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com. You know, this outrage as a way of holding people so that they can sell advertising. And it's doing harm to our republic. You can check the whole thing out, the whole new video, over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 51 minutes past the hour, and Patrick in Long Island, New York. Hey, Patrick, what's on your mind today?
How you doing, Tom? I'm doing very well. I wanted to first thank you for being a good therapeutic ear while we were having roughly a half hour from my home. 770-something people die a night. We're down here in New York to about 110, I think it was last night. If you saw Andrew Cuomo, maybe you have a more accurate figure than I do. But thank you for the ear. I appreciate that. And the other thing I wanted to mention was I had talked to you previous occasions about the fact that I don't believe Trump will be going anywhere. And my feeling as time goes on is getting stronger that he's not going anywhere, and that he's becoming extremely, extremely reckless, which is how you bankrupt a company. And as if he was not reckless before, now he's with the chlorocure thing or whatever. He's doing a snake oil pitch. Look at me. I can drink it. It's safe. And, this went over back in the 1800s where nobody ever talked to anybody because you were separated by miles of no people. But as I said, I expect there to be claims of voter fraud, buses of immigrants coming up, and an appeal to the Supreme Court, lawsuit filed, appeal to the Supreme Court. And next thing you know, we're sitting there in June, July, and Trump is still president.
Yeah. It's like the oldest scam ever, It's like, I've got, Dr. Trump's magic elixir here. Yes, indeed. I'll drink a little bit of it myself. It's just fine. It goes down well.
I wish the fact that he owns stock in these companies would be made public.
Yeah, and one of his largest donors, who is very, very rich and has promised to help him get reelected. This, as Seth Abramson was telling us this morning. Patrick, thank you for the call. Spot on. Tanya in Geneva, Alabama. Hey, Tanya, what's up?
Hey, I got a question, Tom. I'm a first-time caller. My husband loves your show, so I watch it with him.
Thank you, Tanya.
Here's my question. How come nobody has mentioned that with opening up our country again, but anyway, opening it up, and Trump saying everything he is about, there's no coronavirus, it's going away, da-da-da. How come we open up now, and isn't it a possibility that everybody's going to get sick, hopefully just the Republicans because they'll follow their leader, and then we won't be able to vote come November because he'll close down the place. He'll close it and tell us we can't go vote, and he doesn't want us using paper. And already in Alabama, it's too late to get your vote by mail thing. So
really, wow.
So my question is, how come nobody's talking about that? The fact that that's probably in his plans. That's in his crazy brain.
Well, this is how these guys think. There's no doubt about that, Tanya. My personal theory: there's not a constitutional or legal basis for postponing the elections. It just doesn't exist. Congress would have to pass a law, and even then it would be subject to judicial scrutiny. But what is possible, and I really think the Republicans are thinking like this, they're pushing out this message, don't worry, be happy, take some chloroquine, and you can do whatever you want, and you won't get the virus, so don't worry. And they're thinking that come November, the virus is going to be making its second wave. A lot of Americans are going to be very concerned. They're going to be mostly older Americans who are on Social Security or within 10 years of getting Social Security. That's the population that's most likely to die. And those people are most likely to vote Democratic because they want to protect Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. But they're also the population that's least likely to leave their homes to go vote because they don't want to die. And whereas the Trumpsters, Trump is reaching out to people by telling them, don't worry, be happy, everything's going to be okay. And if he can control that message on Fox News and right-wing hate radio long enough, then when the election happens on November 3rd, you're going to have, particularly in states like your state, Alabama, Tanya, you're going to have Republicans showing up at the polls thinking, hey, nothing to worry about. And Trump doesn't care about anything happening after November 3rd. If there's a massive die-off of Republicans after November 3rd, it'll be 3 weeks later. It'll be after he's been re-inaugurated. So he doesn't care. So he's just looking at that, figuring this is going to further suppress the Democratic vote and further enhance the Republican vote. The one wild card on that math about who gets sick and who doesn't get sick and who's afraid to show up and who isn't afraid to show up are young people who are less likely to die from the virus and more likely to vote Democratic. But the problem is that history shows that people under 25 tend not to vote. I mean, it's like the numbers are just terrible. It's like, 20, 30% of the population are voting in those age groups. But I think, Tanya, I'm with you. I think that they're, not that they're going to postpone the election, but I think that they're counting on election chaos and fear among older people who might be the people. And this is why Trump is, and his people are not, holding back about talking about, gutting Social Security and Medicare, because they frankly don't think that Social Security and Medicare recipients, at least in a lot of the swing states, will show up to vote. Tanya, spot on. Thank you for the call, and say hi to your husband for me. I really appreciate it. Great to hear from you, and thank you for watching us on Free Speech TV. We will be right back. We've got Robin Scher is going to be here, a writer based in South Africa. This is a fascinating story. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Here's how I feel about the value of our nation's
We say fight back!
So we've got a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who support our program, and there's a really troubling concatenation of events that are happening in the United States right now. We created these concentration camps for refugees seeking asylum. This was Stephen Miller's big project. And we've got concentration camps for children, concentration camps for male adults, concentration camps for female adults. And now we've got this virus sweeping through the United States, and people are starting to die in these concentration camps, which has provoked ICE or whoever's running them to deport hundreds of the children back to the countries that they came from without their parents, which is mind-boggling, and in many cases carrying disease. This is serious stuff, and we need to be talking about it. The new video is over at thomhartmann.com.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. This is from Chapter 1, The Power of Data. In November 2017, my Apple MacBook Pro was stolen. It happened on the island of Ibiza, where I was visiting my friend, a documentary filmmaker. We were thinking of making a series of short films to illustrate innovative uses of new technology around the world. We sat together writing down examples of technological innovation, subversion, and creativity we'd already witnessed. We discussed themes I explore in this book, such as surveillance, the gig economy, and the future of work, artificial intelligence, and cryptocurrencies. After uploading our ideas to Google's cloud-based storage platform, Google Drive, we took a short break, locking our laptops in the trunk of our rented car. When we returned, both laptops were gone. Although upset, I was also relieved. I'd be able to recover most of my data because almost all of it was in the cloud. That was what I signed on to when I stored my files with Google as well as with Apple, Microsoft, and Dropbox. But in the bargain, I'd allowed them to profit from my data. It dawned on me, given the terms of service I'd agreed to, that the value of the data of my data to the storage companies was far greater than the value of my laptop to the thief. How many of us are fully aware that companies providing us with cloud storage have ways to monetize our data? They use targeted advertising, for instance, and charge fees once we get hooked on the security and peace of mind that their free services offer. We put faith in these companies to store our files securely, but our private information may no longer remain private if, let's say, the government asks to search through our data. It's also not private because all this data is surveilled, computed, and often manipulated in mysterious ways to influence and shape our behaviors as these corporations see fit. By creating accounts with these companies, we give them access to ourselves. So when we consent to privacy policies, in reality, we're signing on to systems of surveillance never before seen in human history, and we do so without being included or consulted. By desiring to keep our data accessible and recoverable, we lock ourselves into using their services. As I thought about getting my files back in Ibiza, I wondered, does access to my own property have to come with such strings attached? In my relationship to Apple, I find the strings impossible to untie. By purchasing an Apple laptop, I had unwittingly transformed from a customer into a part of the company's product line. I had provided Apple with private data and trusted Apple to protect it. Now, to retrieve that data, I had to purchase a new laptop with Apple-owned peripherals and devices. So I caught the next flight to Madrid. I then took the train to the city's Apple store located in Puerto del Sol. In many ways, this central plaza still serves in its centuries-old role as a landmark and gathering place for the entire Spanish nation, a point from which numerous roads emanate. With its distinctive aesthetic and its strategic placement in a civic space, the Apple Store stood out among the adjacent parliamentary and government buildings as if the global brand were more powerful than Spain itself. The day I was there, more people entered and left the Apple Store than passed through the doors of my neighboring building. In 2017, Apple, a private corporation worth more than $1 trillion, actually began to conceptualize its retail stores as town squares, thereby branding itself an integral part of our everyday lives. Other big technology corporations describe themselves in similar terms. Facebook CEO and founder Mark Zuckerberg, for instance, refers to the company as a social infrastructure for the global community. So what we have in the digital world are privately owned public spheres. They're branded as public, civic, and virtuous, but in reality are dominated by a single logic, extending profitability and economic value. How can these companies' interests be the same as the public interest? Like many other large corporations, Apple is shareholder-owned and therefore primarily accountable to its investors and executives, rather than to its employees, customers, or the general public. I had not begun to unpack the meaning of all this until I realized how monumental the Puerto del Sol Apple Store actually was, as an icon and a structure. As I walked into the store, an Apple employee invited me to purchase a new machine, log on to my iCloud account, and retrieve from Apple Cloud Storage the data that I lost from my stolen laptop. These transactions, completed in less than an hour, were simple and efficient. My data was extraterritorial, easily retrievable in Spain, and likely would be in most other countries. Purchasing a new laptop and getting my data back supported Apple's economic model. National borders were no threat or hindrance. The same was true with retrieving data I had stored on other corporate cloud servers managed by Google and Dropbox. In technology circles, this saying has made the rounds. If you're not the customer, then you're the product. Many of today's technologies come to us for free, but in return, our personal lives come for free to these technologies. But they are accessible for the company's profit and gain. Yes, when we search Google, we look for information, but do we realize that Google is also searching us? Users, and it goes on from there. So the book is Beyond the Valley by Ramesh Srinivasan. Had come to western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight in Chernobyl.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's a fascinating article over on truthout.org right now. The headline is Wildfires Can Reduce Biodiversity. Can biodiversity be used to reduce wildfires? Kind of flipping the formula around. And what a fascinating thought. Robin Scher is the author. Robin is a writer based in South Africa, contributor to Truthout Salon and the Independent Media Institute, truthout.org. And his website is Rob Scher, S-C-H-E-R himself. Robin, welcome to the program. Tell us about wildfires and biodiversity. Where do we begin with this?
Hi, Tom. Well, thanks for having me on your show.
It's my pleasure.
Can you hear me all right all the way out here from South Africa?
Yeah, it's all good. There's just a slight delay, so it's better to just, start talking and keep going. What's up?
All right. Well, Tom, so, I'm a writer, as you said. I'm a journalist. I was living in the United States several years ago. I studied journalism at NYU, and I started working for Alternet. And sort of from that experience, I moved on to working for the Independent Media Institute. And sometime earlier this year, I was commissioned to write this story about the Australian wildfires. And I'd previously written stories about, or I've written a number of stories about the topic of climate change. So sort of continuation of that ongoing beat for me. I hadn't had a specific background in I wouldn't consider myself necessarily an expert or anything on this topic, but my father is a firefighter, but I don't really think that that qualifies me to be an expert. But obviously everyone was aware of the wildfires, even though now, in light of our current circumstances, we sort of it's like a distant memory. But in January it was a pretty big deal, and certainly there will come a time again where it will be headlines. It will be making headlines Rob, once again.
If I may interrupt you, what is the relationship? What is the relationship between wildfires and biodiversity? I'm assuming that wildfires can diminish biodiversity in that they kill off lots and lots of species, and there's only some species that are really well adapted to bouncing back. Let me toss it to you. And how do we reverse that process? How do you were talking in your article about how Aboriginal wisdom in Australia, the indigenous people of Australia, actually used wildfire in a way that enhances biodiversity. Tell us about that.
Yeah, totally. So, Tom, that was probably the most interesting sort of aspect of sort of my research into this, because, previously I think a lot of people are quite aware of sort of the method of fire prevention like that involves using control burns and creating fire breaks. But something that maybe people aren't as aware of is the role that biodiversity could play in in reducing the effects of wildfires. To give an example, the example of Australia, for instance, what was really interesting there was they sort of on a very small scale drew on sort of Aboriginal sort of practices and indigenous knowledge of creating very specific controlled burns that encouraged certain plants to remain intact while others were burned, because it turns out that by burning everything, then you actually kind of get rid of certain types of plants that actually can play a really great role in slowing down the rate at which fires burn. So it's a more targeted approach, it's a more specific area-focused approach.
It sounds absolutely fascinating. Robin, I'm really sorry. Our connection here to South Africa to you is just collapsed, and I'm having a really hard time understanding what you're saying. But I want to thank you so much for being on the program. And I'll refer people. Robin writes for the Independent Media Institute, which I also write for. And this particular piece was published in Truth Out. Wildfires can reduce biodiversity. Can biodiversity be used to reduce wildfires? So, Robin, thanks so much for being on our program, and my apologies that technology has not been our friend here today. Continuing, with our program and some of the issues that we're looking at and talking to, and Joyce, hopefully you can pick up Robin there and speak with him. The first fast food franchisee to advise Donald Trump on reopening restaurants, Joyce Robbins on line 10. Has donated more than $400,000 to Trump's reelection, including $200,000 in March. Kate Taylor writing about this for Business Insider magazine. A roundtable with restaurant industry leaders and President Trump, this was last Monday, would be the first time fast food franchisees participate in these discussions. And this James Bodenstead, who's the CEO of the company that owns Wendy's, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and whatnot, franchises. He has donated over $440,000 to Trump's reelection campaign, including $200,000 that he donated just a few weeks ago in late March. The CEO of Landry's, Tillman Fertitta, is also speaking at the roundtable. Tillman donated $35,000 to the Trump Victory PAC in February. So basically, Donald Trump is bringing together a bunch of fast food franchisees to advise him on how to run his the bailout program and the recovery program, and he's looking for people who have donated to him. It's really pretty pathetic. .gov. The headline is High SARS-CoV-2 Attack Rate Following Exposure at Choir Practice. And this was in Skagit County, Washington. The 122-member choir had become ill. All but 9 or 10 people, 87% of this group of these people who sang together for a couple of hours. There was one person sick with COVID-19. And 87% of the rest of the group, of the 122 members, 61 persons who attended, 53 became ill and were hospitalized, and 2 of them died because one person showed up for choir practice. And because singing, like talking, or even more like yelling, blows these particles out of, through our air, and they are inhaled by all the people around us. And at the same time, you've got these states that are saying, no groups of more than 10 or 20 or 50, it depends on the state, but we'll make an exception for churches. So everybody shows up at church and they get up and they read their hymns or they sing their hymns, and they're blowing viruses all around everybody around them, and that's apparently just fine. I'm telling you, these Republican governors are going to be in for a real shock come the end of summer, as this thing starts just ripping through red states. And I say that with great sadness, frankly, that this junk science and putting politics ahead of science is going to happen. It's 15 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the place where despair is not an option. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Bill in Orlando, Florida. Hey, Bill, you wanted to tell us about your experience of Franco?
Yes. I was there in 1972. At the time, I think he was sickly. I was in Madrid, and he was already sort of a joke. Most people didn't want to talk about him. He had established what is called the Valley of the Fallen, which was supposed to be mausoleum for all of the Republican soldiers who had died during the Spanish Civil War. When democracy returned to Spain a couple of years ago, I guess, I read that in October 2019, his body was exhumed from the mausoleum and buried at a family plot about 35 miles away. So one of the things that the Prime Minister of Spain indicated was that, and I'm paraphrasing, we can't be honoring a dictator like Franco now that we're a democracy. So there is hope. If we can last long enough, we can go ahead and try to recover from any damage that fascism does. So I just wanted to share.
But look at the thousands of people who died in the Spanish Civil War, and all the people of Franco imprisoned and tortured. I mean, that was. He wasn't quite as brutal toward the end, in the 60s and 70s, but certainly through the 30s and 40s, his rule was Stalin-esque, was it not?
Oh, it was. And he was already in disgrace towards the end of his life. I think basically the average Spaniard was probably just hoping he would just depart the scene so they could go ahead and rebuild their country. I think that's the feedback I received when I was there in 72. So and they finally did. It took them another 30, 40 years, but they finally went ahead and rejected him. And the final insult, I guess, to his legacy was actually having it exhumed and taken out of the mausoleum and sent away to a family plot so that they could just forget about him.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. I appreciate that. Thank you. David in Spotswood, New Jersey. Hey, David, what's up?
Hey, I just wanted to, I'm 54 years old, and I wonder if my memory of journalism or the nightly news serves me correct in the 70s and early 80s. I would think that, and you correct me if I'm wrong, I would think that if I was watching the nightly news back then, that they would show a medical magician from the 1800s, Barnum and Bailey doing selling snake oil with this hydrochloroquine nonsense. Instead, what I'm seeing is that the public is seeing professional scientists being asked questions of whether a drug that clearly is dangerous and has no efficacy can work on the president. And I think the president is masterfully fooling all of us to not pay attention to the facts while states reopen. And I'm definitely afraid he's going to be reelected.
Yeah. Oh, he's definitely trying to be reelected. That's what this is all about. And, he's trying to encourage Republicans to go out to the polls and go back to work and put the economy back together so he can, and he's got Powell juicing the stock market so that everything will look good because he thinks that that's what it's going to take. David, spot on. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Hey, we have a special new video up for supporters of our program over at thomhartmann.com. And it's about how FDR in 1944, in fact, January 44, in his State of the Union address, talked about how important it was to add rights to the Bill of Rights. The original Bill of Rights was all political rights. He said it's time to enshrine economic rights in our Constitution. I would add, like most of the governments of Europe have done. And this includes the right to housing, the right to food, the right to a good job that pays well, the right to an education, including a college education, and the right to health care. It is pretty powerful stuff. And frankly, I think that what this coronavirus crisis is proving is that we are all in this together, and that Reagan's thing about government is never going to help you was just a load of crap. And so you can check it out over at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. A bit more of the essentially news of the week that I think is stuff that you probably need to know about and you're generally not going to hear elsewhere. Wall Street is now bundling toxic loans again. We had a caller earlier talking about how your mortgage, the company with whom you have your mortgage, is in theory supposed to give you a 3-month reprieve without tacking it on at the end, without a balloon payment, but rather moving it to the very end of the mortgage. And that 3 months can be rolled over into 6 months. But the reality is that most mortgages in the United States are no longer held by the companies that loaned you the money. They have bundled them and sold them to third parties who are, quote, mortgage servicers. And these mortgage servicers, they don't have the cash flow to pause the mortgages for 3 to 6 months. They have to make the payments to the mortgage companies because they're the middlemen. They're not covered by this law. And so when people call up and they get a hold of one of these mortgage servicers and say, I need a 3-month, pause here, the mortgage servicers either tell them it's not possible or tell them that there's a balloon payment or scare them. You can go to jail if there's any fraud involved in this stuff. If you didn't fill out the application right, et cetera, et cetera. Well, it gets worse than that. Now, over on Wall Street, there's a new ProPublica examination that found that some of the biggest banks in the world have been, quote, engaged in a systemic fraud to inflate the value of commercial mortgages. Now, I was talking about home mortgages just a minute ago. These are commercial mortgages, commercial real estate that has been bundled into securities and then sold to other investors. This is a virtual repeat of 2008. And ProPublica found evidence. This is based on a whistleblower's complaint. A business that with a net income of $1,100,000 in 2016 was claimed to have had an income of $1.3 million. A loan for a trailer park, when bundled, was declared to have expenses about a third lower than in years past. The investigators examined 6 loans and found similar patterns in every single one of them. Remember the liar loans? They tried to blame the whole crash of 2008, the Bush crash. They tried to blame that on first-time homeowners, particularly Hispanics, who didn't have to state their income. In fact, didn't even have to say if they were employed. And banks were happily giving out mortgages to these people. Well, it wasn't those people's fault. It was the banks who were soliciting them, saying, hey, I can get you a mortgage and you don't even have to prove that you're employed. And now, apparently, the same thing is happening with commercial mortgages, and they're piling these things up. So it's pretty bad stuff. Meanwhile, 10 horrifying numbers, this from the Economic Collapse blog, showing that the U.S. is actually now in a depression. National Bureau of Economic Research, more than 100,000 U.S. businesses have permanently shut down. The Federal Reserve, number one. Number two, the Federal Reserve is predicting that the GDP of the United States, this is the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta, not the entire Fed, is going to shrink by 42% during the second quarter. I frankly doubt it's going to be quite that bad, but I think it's going to be well over 30%. Number three, on Friday we learned U.S. retail sales were down 16%. That's an all-time record. Number 4, factory output is down almost 14% last month. That's the worst ever recorded. Number 5, U.S. industrial production fell 11.2%. That's the worst number in 101 years. We learned that the number of Americans who filed initial claims for unemployment went up by another 2.9 million. That was last Thursday. That gives us 36.5 million officially unemployed. And then you've got millions and millions of people who live in red states where the unemployment systems basically don't work or are designed to deny claims. Florida's probably the worst because of the way that Rick Scott put it together when he was governor. And so there's millions more that are trying to get unemployment benefits, trying to be on the official list. But we've got 36 million officially there. It's probably closer to 40, 45. The Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago says now the actual unemployment rate in the United States today is 30%. Almost 40% of households with an income of less than $40,000 a year say they've lost a job during this crisis. 42%, according to this study, of the job losses will end up being permanent. A U.S. homeless population could rise by 45% by the end of this year. I mean, this is really grim stuff. JCPenney filing for Chapter 11. A lot of these companies, by the way, that are going bankrupt, particularly some of these retail companies, are companies that had been bought up or taken over by these vulture capital firms, this so-called private equity, this scam that Mitt Romney used to turn himself into a billionaire. And basically they buy the company, they borrow $1 billion, they buy the company for $1 billion, and then they make the company pay back the $1 billion loan out of cash flow and by laying off half their staff. And then once the $1 billion loan is paid off by the company, the vulture capital people, the private equity people, then sell the company and keep the money. And the company is now busted and bankrupt and all kinds of, this is what happened to Clear Channel, for example. It's happening in sector after sector after sector. Well, these are the most vulnerable companies, and they're the ones that are dropping by like flies right now. We'll be back with your calls right after this. It's coming up on 28 minutes past.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Stick around. We'll be right back.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Medical Apartheid, the Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present by Harriet A. Washington. This is from the introduction. On a sylvan stretch of New York's patrician Upper Fifth Avenue, just across from the New York Academy of Medicine, a colossus in marble, august inscriptions, and a bas-relief caduceus grace a memorial bordering Central Park. These laurels venerate the surgeon James Marion Sims, M.D., as a selfless benefactor of women. Nor is this the only statuary erected in honor of Dr. Sims. Marble monuments to his skill, benevolence, and humanity guard his native South Carolina State House, its medical school, the Alabama Capitol grounds, and a French hospital. In the mid-19th century, Dr. Sims dedicated his career to the care and cure of women's disorders and opened the nation's first hospital for women in New York City. He attended French royalty, his Grecian visage inspired oil portraits, and in 1875 he was elected president of the American Medical Association. Hospitals still bear his name, including a West African hospital that utilizes the eponymous gynecological instruments that he at first invented for surgeries upon black female slaves in the 1840s. But this benevolent image vies with the detached Marion Sims portrayed in Robert Thom's J. Marion Sims, Gynecological Surgeon, an oil representation of an experimental surgery upon his powerless slave, Betsy. Sims stands aloof, arms folded, one hand holding a metroscope, the forerunner of the speculum, as he regards the kneeling woman in a coolly evaluative medical gaze. His tie and morning coat contrast with her simple servant's dress, rag, and bare feet. The painting, commissioned and distributed by the Park Davis Pharmaceutical House more than a century after the surgeries, as one of its History and Medicine in Pictures series, takes telling liberties with the historical facts. Thom portrays Betsy as a fully clothed, calm slave woman who kneels complacently on a small table, hand modestly raised to her breast before a trio of white male physicians. Two other slave women peer around a sheet, apparently hung for modesty's sake, in a childlike display of curiosity. This innocuous tableau could hardly differ more from the gruesome reality in which each surgical scene was a violent struggle between the slaves and physicians, and each woman's body was a bloodied battleground. Each naked, unanesthetized slave woman had to be forcibly restrained by the other physicians through her shrieks of agony as Sims determinedly sliced, then sutured her genitalia. The other doctors who could fled when they could bear the horrific screams no longer. It then fell to the women to restrain one another. I wanted to reproduce Thom's painting on the cover of this book, or at least in the text, but when I asked permission of its copyright holder, Pfizer Incorporated, the company insisted on reviewing the entire manuscript of this book before making a decision. As an independent scholar, I could not acquiesce to this, and I used another cover image. When I renewed my request to use the image within the text, Pfizer agreed to base its decision upon reading this chapter and an outline of the book. The Pfizer executives apparently were uncomfortable with what they read because they refused to grant permission to reproduce this telling image or even respond to my query after I supplied the requested chapter and outline. This act of censorship exemplifies the barriers some choose to erect in order to veil the history of unconscionable medical research with blacks. Betsy's voice has been silenced by history, but as one reads Sims' biographers and his own memoirs, a haughty, self-absorbed researcher emerges, a man who bought black women slaves and addicted them to morphine in order to perform dozens of exquisitely painful, distressingly intimate vaginal surgeries. Not until he had experimented with his surgeries on Betsy and her fellow slaves for years did Sims essay to cure white women. Was Sims a savior or a sadist? It depends, I suppose, on the color of the women you ask. Marion Sims epitomizes the two faces, one benign, one malevolent, of American medical research. Quote, "Of all the forms of inequality, injustice in health is the most shocking and the most inhumane." In 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke those words in Montgomery, Alabama, at the end of the Selma to Montgomery march that had been attended by the black and white physicians of the Medical Committee for Human Rights. King had invited the doctors not only to give medical help to injured marchers, but also to witness the abuse suffered at the hands of segregationists. With these almost unnoticed words, King ushered in a new era in civil rights because, as Delegate to Congress Donna Christensen Christian, MD, chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Health Brain Trust, has declared, health disparities are the civil rights issue of the 21st century. Thus, Dr. King's alarm over racial health injustice was prescient, and were he alive today, his concerns would be redoubled. Mounting evidence of the racial health divide confronts us everywhere we look, from doubled black infant death rates to African American life expectancies that fall years behind whites. Infant mortality of African Americans is twice that of whites. The book, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington.
Coming up on the Science Revolution this week, Dr. Michael Mann is here on heat, sea levels in the Amazon. Oh my. Environmental scientist and writer Dana Nuccitelli drops by on Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans documentary. He explains how it peddles dangerous climate denialism. And journalist David Sirota is exposing the coronavirus cover-up. In Geeky Science, I'm discussing the importance of biodiversity and how the future of the Amazon may depend on tapir poop. Find the Science Revolution wherever fine podcasts are available.
We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy. an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. Welcome back. Jania in Charlotte. Am I saying that right?
Yes. Thank you, Tom. How are you?
I am well. I hope you are too, Jania. What's on your mind today?
I'm hanging in there. I just want to say thank you for allowing me to rant. I live on the South Carolina border, so I'm right here, North Carolina, South Carolina. You can literally put one leg in each. And thank God, Ward Cooper, bless his heart, he's trying his best. He's trying to slowly open up. And he has everyone and everything against him. I really feel like North Carolina is honestly more of a blue state, especially Charlotte. But there's so much corruption here that they make sure they keep it red, that it's kept red. And South Carolina is totally open. And so they tend to, a lot of them commute and tend to work here and also go to hospitals here. And they're not reporting their numbers correctly either. They're suppressing a lot of the numbers. So it looks like Mecklenburg County, where I reside, numbers are continuously growing, but they're not accounting, they don't account for South Carolina as well, which we really do share this area with. And so it's just total chaos. And I just want to say I'm not only praying for myself, but I'm praying for everyone else, including you and your family. And, it's one of those hurry up and wait. It's like, what do you do? I was starting to get all ramped up for, to vote and to get on certain boards, electoral boards and stuff. And now with the COVID, it's like it's a standstill. And I hate just watching TV and feeling like, come on, what can I do? And I don't know. Just a little frustrated.
Have you? Yeah, Jania, I get what you're talking about, and Roy Barnes, your governor there in North Carolina, is a Democrat. You've got a Republican running South Carolina, so the contrast between the two must be fascinating, given that you live right there on the border.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Have you contacted, and you're interested in participating in public service? Have you contacted the local Democratic Party to see if there's a way that you can do that without having to go to any public meetings that might put yourself at risk?
You know what? I have, and I'm waiting on someone to get back with me. But I put on my calendar. I have to. I don't know. I'm a very visual person, so. They told me they would get back with me, but I put on my calendar as of Monday to start back. So I will continue to call, and I don't want to overwhelm them, but I do want to get started. I want to see what I can do, whether it be Zoom or whatever. I don't know. Even if they want me to try to invent some stuff, I'm willing to do whatever. I don't understand how rules don't apply anymore. There was a guy with a bazooka in Subway in Raleigh. Never got arrested. A bazooka. I promise you, it's pictures. You can look it up.
I believe you. I believe you.
They went down and they had guns, and this one guy had a bazooka, and they were trying to get places they were trying to help places open. And I believe this was in Subway where the picture was taken. And I'm like, I can't. I have a son that I have to tell him, be careful if you go jogging down the street. It's just amazing. It's a trip.
It is. It really is. Well, Jania, thank you for the call, and keep us up to date on your explorations of public service and with the reports from Charlotte, North Carolina. I appreciate it. It's so nice to hear from you.
I will. If they let me know anything, I will make sure I spread it. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks. Good talking to you. Yeah, bye-bye. Joan in Rochester, Minnesota. Hey, Joan, what's on your mind today?
Well, you were talking about the banks foreclosing on homes and everything. Back years ago, the banks had a method that they used to accumulate these homes that were foreclosed on. A young couple would go in, and I have firsthand knowledge because I worked with buyers, and the bank would say, your credit rate is a little low. We'll give you this rate right now, and we'll give you 2 years to raise your credit score, and at that time, we will give you the going rate for your property, if you can raise your score. So the 2 years go by, the young couple go in, and the bank says to them, oh, well, we've raised our limits. You now have to have a higher credit score, which you did not do. So your new rate for your loan is 12%. Well, these young people, could not afford the new 12%. And they were lied to in the beginning, and they lost their homes. It was not the buyers. It was not the young people who were excited about getting a home. It was the fact that the banks, right in the beginning, had no intention of giving them a rate and had every intention of foreclosing on those homes. And it happened to 2 or 3 of my clients because I worked with low-income families. So they can say all they want and criticize these young home buyers. But the banks did a number on them, and it sounds like that's what they're planning on doing again. And I hope somebody warns them or tells the bank to knock it off.
Yeah, this bankster grift, like Steve Mnuchin was practicing in California back before 2008, really needs to stop. And it's one of the things that Elizabeth Warren has been all over. Bernie Sanders has spoken out extensively about as well. Joan, thank you. Thanks for sharing your expertise and your experience with us. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, how are you today? What's up?
Well, I'm just thinking, given what's going on, and a previous caller citing a bazooka in
yeah.
Tom, I hope people don't think that once Donald Trump is defeated, and I pray that he will be, I don't think he's going to go away. I don't think any of this right-wing propaganda is going to go away. In fact, I think it's going to increase. It'll increase in the media because he won't have the bully pulpit of the presidency, the president's podium to do what he does. What's that, One American Network or whatever? You hear that advertised on right-wing radio, so that's going to be. And now you have this situation.
Oh, he and his buddies are trying to buy that, you know.
Oh yeah, well, I hear the advertisements for all of his pals. You can see Rudy Giuliani and all the names that we know and love. It's just a big propaganda network. And do you think he's going to shut his mouth when he's defeated? He's going to say, "Oh, no. Congratulations to Joe Biden." No, he's going to say he's a cricket, and it's just going to get worse and worse. The guy's a psychopath. And now it's ingrained in the society. What happened here that people can, in Michigan, they walk around with guns in the state house, seat of government, and you got bazookas in the subway. Wait a minute. Here's what I wonder. If you have a gun and you feel threatened, you can shoot somebody. But what if I don't have a gun and I feel threatened? What can I do? Nothing. Or I'll get shot. That's what our society has come to. And we are going to find bands of bullies in every state, pushing people around unless you push them back. And it's time to start punching them in the mouth. And I mean that figuratively. I mean that in terms of what you say. There you go.
Yeah, okay, I get that. I think, though, if we look at the lessons of history, Paul, the Klan was real active in the 1920s, particularly during the Roaring '20s. And then the Great Depression happened, and everybody was like, whoa, we've got to deal with this. And then Franklin Roosevelt started putting our country back together in a way that was collective rather than divisive. And I may be wrong, but I believe that Klan activity actually dropped during the 30s and 40s. And, I'm hopeful that we'll see something like that, whether that's actually what happened back then or not. I'm hopeful that will be the outcome of this.
I think Yeah, the thing is that we had cities growing like they weren't in the 20s. The 20s, the cities were still, only half the people lived in cities, half the people lived still on the farm.
Yeah, that's true. And now the farm is like 10% or less. Paul, thanks a lot for the call. It's always nice to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be right back with more of your calls in just a second. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Quarter up. And welcome back. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind today?
I got a couple questions for you, Tom. First, if Seth Abramson can find enough evidence to print a book about the scandals of this administration, why can't Pelosi and Schumer? And second, I agree with some of your other callers that Trump isn't going anywhere. What's to stop him, if he gets 4 more years, to going with a sharp little programmer to the NSA and saying, I want a query run for everybody over the age of 16 to check all their phone calls, texts, and tweets that are negative to me, and just pull up a list of all the people he considers undesirable to him and his goals.
He's already doing that, Mark, only he's doing it specifically for people who are federal government employees. They're deciding who gets promoted and who doesn't get promoted based on a deep dive into their social media stuff and any publicly available information. And the guy running that used to work in the White House for Trump and left in some kind of a scandal. But that's what's going on. And Trump is actually proud of that. In fact, he's trying to say that the reason why he's firing these inspector generals is, and particularly the one who, Steve Linick, I think his name is, the IG for the State Department, is because he was appointed by Obama. Therefore, he's not loyal to me. I mean, this whole loyalty test thing should be a giant red flag for us. That's what fascists do. But it seems like everybody's just saying, oh, that's business as usual.
If he's already got this set up, then it'd be real easy to just flip it over to just go through the citizenry.
Yep. And this is essentially what they did, with the when they pushed through their $1.5 trillion, when you include interest payments and everything, there's the $2 trillion tax break for billionaires and big corporations. One of the things that they added to it was this so-called SALT, which was limiting the ability of people in blue states to deduct from their income taxes, their federal income taxes, the state income taxes that they paid in excess of $10,000 a year. And so people who were, high wage earners who, in high tax states like New York State, I believe the income tax in New York State is over 10%. I think it's 14%. I could be wrong on that, but it's substantial. So there's a lot of people in New York State who are making good money and paying over $10,000 a year in property taxes. Same in California. Those people can no longer deduct those state taxes above $10,000 from their federal taxes. That was intentional. I mean, Trump put that into the law specifically to kneecap the high tax blue states. It's like selective. What you're talking about is selective investigation and prosecution based on political activity. Here you've got selective taxation and the benefits of tax breaks being based on political activity. I mean, and that was 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that you fucking cut me off, dickhead.
No, I'm here, but I think Mark might have dropped a bad word there, so we'll just move along. But it's, the point that Mark is raising, I think is absolutely viable, absolutely possible. And I think what's actually going on right now is that we're seeing essentially a dress rehearsal for all this. And that's not a good thing. It's not at all a good thing. It's coming up on 10 minutes before the hour here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a minute. Stick around.
that this nation should commit itself to achieving a goal.
Thom Hartmann here. Did you know that Chief Justice John Roberts, back when he worked for Ronald Reagan, came up with a way that Congress and the White House could get around the Supreme Court? Specifically, they were trying to blow up Roe v. Wade and Brown versus Board, but it could be used by Democrats right now. It's fascinating. It's in my new book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America, available wherever fine books are sold. I just retweeted this brilliant tweet by John Hausman. He says CNN is not taking any S word anymore, any crap anymore, and I'm forgetting her name. I think it's Brianna. Well, in any case, it's one of the CNN hosts, and up in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, or up in the upper left-hand corner, looking at the screen, it says "distract and deceive." The president pushes baseless conspiracies, lies, firing watchdogs, whistleblower attacks, slamming media. And then down at the bottom, the chyron, the big letters say, Trump escalates distraction, deception, and lies as deaths soar. 90,000 Americans dead, 1.5 million Americans infected. We are now roughly a third of the world's deaths and a third of the world's infections. This is purely because Donald Trump had no plan, and he was informed literally back in November of this. In fact, we informed Israel that it was coming in November. It's just mind-boggling. Pam in Chicago. Hey, Pam, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. To let you know, Tom, I appreciate your program. And, Tom, I held on for about 2 hours and 30 minutes. That's not a complaint, but that's just to say how important it is for us to try to get on, but to hear everything that you talk about within the time that we're holding. And I appreciate you, Tom. So first, Tom, let me quickly respond to the pull yourself up by the bootstrap. You know that Reverend Dr. King had a very profound and eloquent response to that. And I'll just say he called it a cruel jest to talk about lift yourself up by your bootstraps for a bootless man. And, of course, you all could go on YouTube or whatever to find his full response. He was responding to an interviewer from NBC, if I recall. So you can get that full response. It was very profound and eloquent. Secondly, Tom, when we talk about reopening, Tom, we're not being concerned enough about the people who have to clean up the COVID patient, right? Mm-hmm. The people who are in Walmart having to clean up the public bathrooms. I mean, the media, it's not being captured there. The working class people who are really afraid to go back. So, Tom, I know you can't do it now, but perhaps tomorrow you could talk about how Trump and his administration should have responded to this so that people wouldn't be pressured to go back to work. And some business owners really don't want to open because they're not confident that they can prevent COVID. We're not even talking about it. Yes.
No, I'm sorry, Pam. Finish your thought, then I'll ring.
I was just going to say, we're not even talking about an effective method for disinfecting, Tom. I'm seeing them spray bottles, right, spray disinfect, and wipe down with the same towel. That can't be correct, Tom. We're not even talking about proper procedures for disinfecting things. So,
well, it may be. I mean, the towel may be so filled with disinfectant that it works. But there's a great piece over in The Guardian, just to add to what you're saying, Pam, that they're doing cell phone location data tracking of these anti-lockdown protesters. They can actually, follow the protesters, and they're going from state to state. These guys are not your working class Joes who are desperate to get their job back. They're being funded by right-wing billionaires like Betsy DeVos, who is funding the so-called protesters, these Nazis in Michigan. And, this whole story of, these are just poor middle-class white guys that want their jobs back. No, these are Nazis, and they're being funded by right-wing billionaire Nazis. And you're absolutely right, Pam. The people, and I've been talking about this for a while, I think that at least time and a half hazard pay for these people whose jobs literally put them into not just daily contact with coronavirus exposures, but hour by hour contact. As you said, cleaning the bathrooms, the people who are working in stores, practically, across the retail spectrum. And what Trump has done, and what many of these governors have done, particularly the red state governors, by saying no more state of emergency, no more declaration of public health crisis. What they're doing is they're making it impossible for people who this is their only job option. This is what they've got. To say, I'd like to stay out for another couple of weeks until this thing is under control because I don't want to get sick and die, or I don't want to get sick and bring it home and have grandma die, or my uncle or brother who's overweight die, or whatever it may be. And I think it's just absolutely criminal, and there needs to be more exposure of the scam of these Open Now protesters. Your thoughts?
And it is the Republican Party, Tom. We have to say it is Trump, and it is the Republican Party. And for me, they are now a political arm of the hate groups, the white supremacists. And I just can't deal with Republicans. So I don't know if Biden's strategy to try to win them over. I'm not into that.
I hope not.
I want to register Democratic voters, people with compassion, who want to work with the working class. We need a Medicare for all, Tom. People are losing their health care. Thank you.
You're welcome, Pam. Pam, thank you very much for the call. And Pam is so right. And, we need to be paying people, particularly when they're at risk. We need to be paying people well. We need to have universal health care for everybody in the United States. We need to declare an absolute jubilee on student loan debt and say, it's only $1.5 trillion. Now, there was a time when you wouldn't have put the word only before $1.5 trillion, but Trump has taught us if you can give a $1.5 trillion tax break to billionaires like him and Betsy DeVos, you can give a $1.5 billion break to the millions of Americans who are deeply in student debt. So wipe out the student debt, make college free, and let's join the rest of the developed world. It's just that simple. It is literally just that simple. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, and it requires more than just voting. It requires waking people up. So tell your friends about how to find progressive media. Tag You're It. We'll see you tomorrow. Have a great afternoon. Be nice to yourself and the people around you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
We say fight back!